This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've been meaning to type this out for months now, but every time I sit down to do it, my hands start shaking and I have to step away. Even now, 7 months later, I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about what happened that night in Colombia. I'm only sharing this now because I want to warn other solo travelers about trusting too easily. I used to be that person who believed in the good of everyone. Not anymore. I had been backpacking through South America for about 3 months when I reached Colombia. Up until then, my trip had been amazing. Peru was breathtaking. Ecuador was an adventure lover's paradise. I was excited about Colombia because everyone I'd met on the road raved about the country's transformation, how friendly the people were, and how it wasn't anything like its dangerous reputation from decades ago. The first week in Colombia was exactly as promised. Cartagena was beautiful, and I had a blast in Bogotá. Then I made my way to Medellin. That's where everything changed. I was staying at this hostel in El Poblado, a trendy neighborhood in Medellin. On my second night there, I met this group of locals at a bar near the hostel. They were all sitting together, laughing and having a good time. Juan, the most outgoing of the group, noticed me sitting alone and invited me to join them. That simple gesture of kindness, at least that's what I thought it was, nearly cost me my life. Juan introduced me to his friends, Carlos, Maria, and a few others whose names I don't remember now. They were all so friendly, buying me drinks, telling me about places tourists never see. Juan spoke the best English, but the others tried too. They seemed genuinely interested in showing me the real Colombia. "Alex," Juan said at one point, his arm around my shoulder like we were old friends, "tomorrow we're going to this amazing place in the jungle. Waterfalls, exotic animals, incredible views. No tourists, just pure Colombia. You should come with us." I remember hesitating. I'd read all the travel blogs about being careful, not going off with strangers, sticking to the tourist routes. But they seemed so genuine. Maria showed me pictures on her phone of this gorgeous waterfall, claiming it was from their last trip. Carlos chimed in about how his family had a small cabin nearby where we could stay. They weren't asking for money. They just wanted to share their beautiful country with a visitor. God, I was so stupid. The next morning, Juan picked me up from my hostel in an old Jeep. Carlos and Maria were already inside, along with 2 other guys who hadn't been at the bar the night before. They didn't speak much English, but greeted me with smiles. I threw my backpack in the trunk, keeping only my phone, wallet, and a small day pack with water and snacks. As we drove out of Medellin, I remember texting my mom that I was going on a day trip with some locals I'd met. I sent her a quick picture of us all in the Jeep. That text might have saved my life. The drive took much longer than I expected. What Juan had described as a couple hours turned into 4, then 5. The roads got progressively worse until we were basically off-roading through dense vegetation. My phone lost service about 2 hours in, and I started feeling uneasy. When I asked how much further, Juan just kept saying, "Not much, almost there." By early afternoon, we reached a point where the Jeep couldn't go any further. We had to continue on foot. Juan grabbed a large backpack from the trunk, and Carlos took out another bag and what looked like camping equipment. When I questioned this, Juan explained that the hike would take a couple of hours, and we'd camp at the site before returning tomorrow. This wasn't what I had agreed to, but I was already hours from civilization with no cell service. What choice did I have? The hike was brutal. The trail barely existed. just a faint path through thick jungle. I kept slipping on mud and getting scratched by branches. The others moved confidently, like they'd done this many times before. We walked for about 3 hours, and I noticed that Juan was constantly checking his watch and occasionally speaking in rapid Spanish to Carlos. When I asked what they were talking about, Juan would just smile and say they were discussing which route to take. By sunset, we reached a small clearing with 3 makeshift huts. There was no waterfall in sight, no beautiful vista, just these ramshackle structures that looked like they were used for hunting or something illegal. My stomach dropped. This was not a tourist spot. "Where's the waterfall?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Tomorrow morning," Juan said, not meeting my eyes. "Too dark now. We camp here tonight." They started setting up a campfire. Maria pulled out some food and a bottle of aguardiente, the local liquor. The atmosphere had changed. The friendly, outgoing personalities were gone. They spoke among themselves in Spanish, occasionally glancing at me. I pretended to be tired and sat a bit away from them, desperately trying to get a signal on my phone. Nothing. As darkness fell completely, Juan brought me a cup of the aguardiente and insisted I drink with them. I took small sips, pretending to drink more than I actually was. My instincts were screaming at me that something was very wrong. After about an hour of this tense pseudo-socializing, Juan stood up and walked over to me. The friendly mask was completely gone now. His eyes were cold, calculating. "So Alex from America," he said, his tone completely different from before. "How much money do you have in your bank account?" My blood ran cold. "What? Your bank account? And who will miss you if you don't come back?" Before I could respond, Carlos and one of the other men grabbed me by the arms. I tried to fight, but they were stronger. They dragged me toward one of the huts while I kicked and screamed. Juan slapped me hard across the face. "Shut up," he hissed. "No one can hear you out here. Tomorrow you will call your family and tell them to send money. If they do, maybe you live. If not—" He shrugged, smiling now. They threw me into the smallest hut and tied my wrists with some kind of rough rope. The hut was basically just a wooden frame with planks forming walls and a roof, dirt floor beneath me. There was one tiny window, no bigger than my hand. They took my day pack, phone, and wallet, then locked the door from the outside with what sounded like a padlock. I lay there in the dark, my mind racing. I could hear them outside, drinking and laughing now, occasionally saying my name and then laughing harder. I realized with horrifying clarity that they had done this before. This was their operation, luring tourists to this remote location, ransoming them, and probably killing them afterward, regardless of whether they got paid. I don't know how long I lay there, maybe an hour. They had tied my hands in front, not behind my back. I worked at the ropes with my teeth until my gums bled, but they wouldn't budge. The hut was pitch black, except for tiny slivers of moonlight coming through gaps in the planks. I crawled around the perimeter, feeling the walls for any weakness. Near the back, one of the planks felt looser than the others. Using my bound hands together, I pushed against it. It gave slightly. I pushed harder, ignoring the splinters digging into my skin. The voices outside were getting quieter. They were either passing out or going to sleep. This might be my only chance. I positioned myself with my feet against the plank and pushed with all my strength. It creaked but didn't break. I tried again and again until sweat was pouring down my face despite the cool night air. On what must have been my 10th try, the plank cracked and partially gave way. I kicked it again, and it broke enough to create a hole maybe 18 inches wide. I listened carefully. No reaction from outside. I squeezed through the hole, the rough edges tearing my shirt and scraping my back. Once outside, I froze, listening. The campfire was dying down. I could see 4 figures sleeping around it. No sign of the others. They must have been in the other huts. I had 2 choices. Try to find the trail we came in on, or just run in any direction to put distance between us. The trail would eventually lead back to the jeep, but they would look for me there first. In the darkness, with no light, finding the trail seemed impossible anyway. I decided to run. The jungle at night is a nightmare. I couldn't see more than a foot in front of me. Every step was a potential broken ankle. I tripped constantly over roots and rocks, fell into small ditches, got slapped by branches I couldn't see coming. The only blessing was that the nearly full moon provided just enough light to distinguish trees from empty space. I have no idea how long I ran. Time lost all meaning. My body was on autopilot. Just keep moving. The sounds of the jungle were terrifying. Screeches and calls from animals I couldn't identify. Every noise made me think they were coming for me. My hands were still tied, which made balancing even harder. My lungs burned. My legs were on fire. But stopping meant death. After what felt like hours, I saw something through the trees, the faintest reflection of moonlight on metal. I approached cautiously and nearly cried when I saw it was their jeep. Somehow, in the dark, running blindly, I had circled back to the road. I froze, listening for any signs of pursuit. Nothing but jungle sounds. I made my way to the jeep and nearly collapsed when I saw the keys were still in the ignition. Juan had been so confident in his isolation that he hadn't bothered to take them. Getting into the driver's seat with bound hands was awkward, but I managed. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life. In the distance, I heard shouting. They had heard the engine. I threw the jeep into gear and slammed the gas pedal. The headlights illuminated the narrow dirt road ahead. In the rearview mirror, I saw figures emerging from the trees. Juan in front, his face contorted with rage. The jeep bounced violently on the uneven road. I could barely steer with my tied hands, but I didn't slow down. I just needed to get far enough away to find help or a signal. The road was barely more than a trail, with branches scraping the sides of the jeep. Several times I nearly drove off the edge, but somehow kept going. After about 15 minutes of this terrifying drive, I came to a slightly wider dirt road, still remote, but clearly more traveled. I turned onto it, hoping it led to civilization. For hours I drove like this, following any road that seemed to lead toward lights or signs of habitation. Eventually, as dawn was breaking, I reached a small town. I drove straight to what looked like a police station, a small building with a Colombian flag and a uniformed officer standing outside. When he saw me pull up, bloody, still bound, wild-eyed with terror, he immediately called for help. The local police cut my restraints and tried to understand my broken Spanish mixed with English. They called in someone who spoke better English, and I told them everything. They seemed genuinely shocked and concerned, immediately calling in reinforcements and taking my statement. They found my passport and some cash still in my backpack in the jeep, but my phone and credit cards were gone. The police drove me to a hospital in a larger nearby town where I was treated for dehydration, cuts, and bruises. I spent the next 2 days dealing with police reports and the U.S. Embassy. The embassy staff arranged for emergency funds so I could get a flight home. The police said they would investigate, but the location was so remote and I had been so disoriented that I couldn't guide them back there with any accuracy. I left Colombia the next day and haven't been back since. I later learned from embassy staff that there had been several disappearances of tourists in that region over the past few years, but bodies were rarely found and cases remained unsolved. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't escaped that night. Would my family have paid a ransom only to never hear from me again? Would I have become another statistic, another backpacker who went missing in South America? I still have nightmares about Juan's face as he stood in the jungle, watching me drive away. In my dreams, he's always catching up to me, always just behind me. I wake up gasping for air, convinced I'm still running through that pitch-black jungle. I don't trust strangers anymore. I don't travel alone. I check locks 3 times before sleeping. 7 months later, and I'm still looking over my shoulder. If you're traveling, especially alone, please be careful who you trust. No matter how friendly someone seems, no matter how genuine their interest appears to be, never go somewhere remote with people you just met. That's the lesson I learned in the hardest possible way. A lesson that nearly cost me my life. I still can't believe I'm actually typing this out. My hands are shaking just thinking about that night. It's been 8 months since I came back from Japan, and I still wake up in cold sweats sometimes, thinking I hear footsteps outside my door. I was studying abroad in Tokyo for what was supposed to be a full-year program in international business. I'd been there for about 4 months and was finally getting comfortable with the city, the language, and the culture. Tokyo is massive, a sprawling maze of neighborhoods, each with its own personality. I was staying in a small apartment in Shinjuku, not far from my university. That night started so normally. I'd been studying at the campus library until around 11 p.m. The end-of-term exams were coming up, and I was determined to ace them. When I left, it had just started to rain, one of those sudden spring downpours that seems to come out of nowhere. I didn't have an umbrella, but I didn't mind getting a little wet on the walk home. The rain in Tokyo always felt different somehow, cleaner, making the neon lights blur and reflect off the wet pavement in these amazing patterns. I decided to take a shortcut through some back streets I'd discovered a few weeks earlier. It was probably a stupid decision in hindsight, but I'd walked that route several times before without any problems. The narrow streets between the main roads in Tokyo can cut your walking time in half if you know where you're going. The rain was coming down harder now, and I pulled my jacket over my head, picking up my pace. That's when I heard voices coming from an alley up ahead. Something about the tone made me slow down. They weren't the casual voices of friends hanging out or salarymen heading home after drinks. There was tension in those voices, even though I couldn't understand everything they were saying. My Japanese was decent but not fluent, especially with the specific dialect they were using. I should have turned around right then. Every instinct told me to. But curiosity got the better of me, and I peered around the corner. What I saw made my blood run cold. 5 men in dark suits stood in a loose circle under the overhang of a building. Despite the late hour, they wore sunglasses, and I immediately noticed that 3 of them had tattoos peeking out from their collars and wrists. In Japan, tattoos often mean one thing: Yakuza. The organized crime syndicates are real, not just something from movies, though they usually keep a low profile. 2 briefcases were open on the hood of a black luxury car. One contained neatly stacked bundles of cash, more money than I'd ever seen in my life. The other held something I couldn't quite make out in the dim light, but it definitely wasn't paper. I froze, not daring to breathe. Then I slowly started to back away, trying to be as quiet as possible. There was a dumpster nearby, and I crouched behind it, hoping they hadn't seen me. For a few seconds, I thought I was safe. The men continued their conversation, voices low and serious. Then I made the worst mistake of my life. As I shifted position, my elbow knocked against a metal trash can behind me. The sound wasn't particularly loud, but in the quiet alley, it might as well have been a gunshot. The conversation stopped immediately. I heard one of the men say something sharp in Japanese, a command, then footsteps heading in my direction. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I bolted. Behind me, I heard shouts and more footsteps. They were coming after me. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life, my wet sneakers slapping against the pavement. I turned down another alley, hoping to lose them, but I quickly realized I had no idea where I was going. The back streets of Tokyo are like a maze, and in my panic, I'd lost all sense of direction. The rain was pouring down now, soaking me to the skin and making it hard to see. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but terror kept me moving. I could hear at least 2 people still behind me, maybe more. They were calling to each other, coordinating. I turned another corner and found myself in a narrow passage between 2 buildings. My heart sank as I realized it was a dead end. A high wall blocked the way forward, and the only exit was the way I had come in. I was trapped. Panic surged through me. I spun around, desperate for a way out. That's when I noticed the fire escape on the side of one of the buildings. It was old and rusty, and the bottom ladder was pulled up, but there was a dumpster underneath it. Without thinking twice, I climbed on top of the dumpster and jumped, grabbing the bottom rung of the ladder. My wet hands almost slipped, but adrenaline gave me strength. I pulled myself up and started climbing as fast as I could. Below me, I heard the men enter the alley. One of them shouted when he spotted me on the fire escape. I didn't look back. I just kept climbing, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The metal was slippery from the rain, and several times I nearly lost my footing. Finally, I reached the roof of the building, about 6 or 7 stories up. The roof was flat, covered in gravel, with various vents and air conditioning units scattered around. I ran to the opposite edge, hoping to find another fire escape or a way down, but there was nothing, just a sheer drop to the street below. I could hear the men climbing the fire escape now. They were taking their time, talking to each other calmly, like they knew I had nowhere to go. And they were right, except for one possibility. The next building over was so close it almost touched the one I was on. There was a gap, maybe 6 or 7 feet wide, but it might as well have been a mile. One misstep and I'd fall to my death. The sound of footsteps on the fire escape grew louder. I didn't have a choice. I backed up as far as I could, took a deep breath, and ran toward the edge of the roof. At the last possible moment, I pushed off with everything I had. For a second, I was flying through the rain-filled air, the lights of Tokyo blurring below me. Then I hit the opposite roof hard, tumbling forward onto the gravel. Pain shot through my ankle and knees, but I forced myself to get up. Looking back, I saw the first man emerge onto the roof I'd just left. Even through the rain, I could see his face clearly in the city lights, cold, expressionless. He said something to the others, then started backing up, preparing to make the same jump I had. Terror gave me new energy. I limped across the roof, searching desperately for a way into the building. There had to be a maintenance door, a stairwell, something. I found it on the far side, a small metal door. I grabbed the handle and pulled, but it was locked. Behind me, I heard a thud as the first man landed on the roof. I pounded on the door with my fists, screaming for help, though I knew it was useless. Who would hear me up here in the middle of the night? But then, miraculously, the door opened. An elderly Japanese man stood there in pajamas, looking confused and alarmed. I pushed past him, babbling apologies and explanations he couldn't understand. His apartment was tiny and dimly lit, with traditional tatami mats on the floor. An old woman, his wife I assumed, stood in the background, her hand over her mouth. I motioned frantically for him to lock the door, trying to explain the danger with my limited Japanese. Whether he understood me or just sensed my terror, he nodded and secured the door. Then he led me through the apartment to what looked like a storage closet, motioning for me to hide inside among the boxes and old futons. I crawled in, making myself as small as possible, and he closed the door, leaving me in darkness. Through the thin walls I could hear him and his wife talking in low, worried voices. Then came the sound I'd been dreading, pounding on the outer door. Heavy, insistent knocking. The old man's footsteps shuffled across the floor, and I heard the door open, male voices speaking rapidly in Japanese. I couldn't understand everything, but I caught phrases like "young foreigner" and "saw him come this way." The old man's voice was steady as he responded. He was denying seeing anyone, saying he had been asleep until they knocked. There was more back and forth, growing increasingly tense. Then I heard footsteps entering the apartment. They were searching the place. I curled into a tighter ball, trying not to breathe. Sweat mixed with the rainwater on my skin. The footsteps came closer to my hiding place, pausing just outside the door. I could see the shadow of feet in the crack beneath it. A voice said something, another responded. The doorknob turned, and my heart stopped. But then the old woman's voice called out from another room. Whatever she said must have distracted them, because the doorknob returned to its position, and the footsteps moved away. I remained frozen in that closet, not daring to move a muscle. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Eventually, I heard the front door close, and the apartment fell silent. Still, I didn't move. What if they were waiting outside? What if they were just trying to trick me into coming out? More time passed. Finally, the storage closet door opened slowly, and the old man peered in. He motioned for me to come out, his weathered face creased with concern. In halting English, he told me, "Bad men gone. You wait more time, then go." I thanked him over and over, bowing in the Japanese style. He and his wife gave me tea and a towel for my wet clothes, waving away my attempts to explain what had happened. Perhaps they didn't want to know. In a city like Tokyo, sometimes it's safer not to know. I waited in their apartment for another hour, watching the clock tick by painfully slowly. When the old man finally looked out the window and nodded, indicating it was safe to leave, I bowed deeply to both of them. They had risked their lives for a stranger, and I had no way to repay them. The old man walked me to the building's back exit and pointed me toward a main street. I memorized the address, promising myself I would send them a gift once I was safely home. The streets were deserted at that hour, the rain having finally stopped. I stuck to well-lit areas, jumping at every shadow and sound. It took me nearly 2 hours to find my way back to my apartment, taking the long way around and frequently doubling back to make sure I wasn't being followed. When I finally got home, I locked and barricaded my door, then sat on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. The reality of what had happened, what could have happened, hit me all at once. I'd witnessed something I shouldn't have seen, and men who wouldn't hesitate to kill me had seen my face. I couldn't sleep that night. The next morning, I went to the police station and tried to report what had happened. The officers were polite but dismissive. Without evidence, without names or specific locations, what could they do? One of them gave me a look that clearly said I should mind my own business and forget whatever I thought I'd seen. For the next 2 weeks, I lived in constant fear. I changed my routes to school every day. I never went out after dark. I looked over my shoulder constantly, convinced I was being watched or followed. Maybe I was just being paranoid, but sometimes I'd catch glimpses of men in suits that made my blood run cold. I called my parents and told them I was coming home early, making up a story about health problems. 3 days later, I was on a plane back to the States, leaving most of my belongings behind. It wasn't until the plane lifted off that I finally felt like I could breathe again. I still don't know exactly what I witnessed that night. A drug deal, money laundering, something worse, and I'll never know if those men are still looking for me or if they've forgotten about the American student who saw too much. All I know is that I'm never going back to Japan, and I still check the locks on my doors 3 times before I go to bed. Some fears don't fade with time or distance. Some fears become part of who you are. I've been trying to make sense of what happened to me in Moscow for months now. I still wake up in cold sweats, thinking I'm back in that cell. My therapist says writing about it might help, so here goes. It was supposed to be a routine business trip. I work for a tech company based in Boston, and we were looking to expand our software solutions internationally. Russia wasn't even on our radar until this company, Soothe, reached out about implementing our security systems. The projections looked good, a multi-million-dollar deal, so my boss sent me to close it. I'd never been to Russia before. The moment I stepped off the plane at Sheremetyevo Airport, I felt that strange mix of excitement and unease you get in a completely foreign place. Moscow was beautiful in its own way, all those onion domes and imposing Soviet-era buildings. My hotel was one of those international chains near Red Square, nothing special but comfortable enough. The meetings went well for the first 3 days. Their team seemed impressed with our product, and negotiations were moving faster than expected. The main guy I was dealing with was Mikhail Voroshilov, their VP of Operations, mid-50s, sharp dresser, spoke perfect English with that heavy Russian accent you'd expect. He seemed friendly enough, always cracking jokes about American business culture while showing me around. On what was supposed to be my last night in Moscow, Mikhail suggested we celebrate closing the deal at this upscale restaurant near the Bolshoi Theater. "Vincent, we must toast to our new partnership," he insisted, slapping my back. I remember feeling good about the whole thing. The contract was practically signed, just needed some final approvals in the morning. The restaurant was one of those places where you know the bill is going to be ridiculous before you even sit down. All crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, waiters in bow ties. Mikhail ordered for both of us some traditional Russian dishes I couldn't pronounce and way too much vodka. In Russia, we seal deals with proper drinks, not just signatures, he kept saying as he refilled my glass. I'm not a heavy drinker, but I didn't want to seem rude. By our 3rd toast, I was feeling it. Mikhail kept talking about future collaborations, asking questions about our company's security protocols, other clients we worked with. Looking back, I should have noticed how he steered the conversation in certain directions, but at the time, it just seemed like business talk. Around 11 p.m., I remember excusing myself to use the bathroom. My briefcase and jacket were at the table with Mikhail. When I came back, he was on his phone, looking slightly annoyed. Nothing seemed off. We finished dinner, he paid the bill, and his driver took me back to my hotel. I remember shaking his hand in the lobby, agreeing to meet at his office at 10 a.m. to finalize everything. I crashed as soon as I hit the bed. The alcohol plus jet lag knocked me out completely. The next thing I knew, there was loud banging on my door. I thought it was housekeeping at first, but it was barely 6 a.m. according to the clock on the nightstand. The banging continued, getting more aggressive. I stumbled to the door in my t-shirt and boxers, head pounding from last night's vodka. When I opened it, 3 men in police uniforms pushed their way in. One of them started barking something in Russian while the others began searching through my stuff. "What's going on? I don't understand," I kept saying, but they ignored me. The one who seemed in charge finally switched to broken English. "You, Vincent Reed? American businessman?" When I nodded, he shoved a document in my face. "You arrest. Stealing documents. Very serious crime." I couldn't process what was happening. "There's a mistake. I didn't steal anything." They didn't care. One of them grabbed my arms, twisting them behind my back as he slapped handcuffs on me. They were tight, metal digging into my wrists. I kept asking to call my embassy, my company, anyone, but they just shoved me toward the door. The worst part was being marched through the hotel lobby in handcuffs, wearing just my underwear and a t-shirt. The morning staff and a few early risers stared as these cops pushed me along. I felt completely humiliated. They finally allowed me to put on pants and shoes before stuffing me into a police car. The police station was about 20 minutes away. No one would tell me anything during the ride. I kept asking what documents I supposedly stole, but they just told me to shut up. My heart was racing the whole time. This had to be a misunderstanding, I kept telling myself. The station was this dingy Soviet-era building with peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights. They took my passport, wallet, watch, phone, everything. Then they fingerprinted me and took my photo like I was some kind of criminal. I kept demanding to call the U.S. Embassy, but they either didn't understand or didn't care. After processing, they put me in this small room with a metal table and 2 chairs. I sat there for what felt like hours. My hangover was in full swing by then. Pounding headache, mouth dry as sandpaper, and now the added panic of being arrested in a foreign country. Eventually 2 men came in. One introduced himself as Detective Petrov, a heavy-set guy with a permanent scowl. The other guy didn't speak, just took notes. Petrov's English was better than the officers who arrested me, but still pretty basic. "Mr. Reed, you are in very serious trouble," he started. "We have evidence you steal confidential documents from Sovintech Company." "That's impossible," I said. "I was there for legitimate business. We're partnering with them." He opened a folder and slid a photo across the table. It was a grainy security camera image of what looked like my briefcase, open on a table, with some papers visible. "These documents not for you to take. Industrial espionage. Very serious in Russia." I tried explaining that any documents I had were given to me as part of our business deal, but Petrov wasn't having it. He kept circling back to the same accusation that I had stolen proprietary technology information that wasn't included in our agreement. The interrogation went on for hours. They'd leave me alone for 45 minutes, then come back with the same questions. No food, no water, no bathroom breaks unless I begged. The room was freezing cold, probably deliberately. By afternoon, I was exhausted, dehydrated, and terrified. I finally asked, "Did Mikhail Voroshilov report this theft?" Petrov's face changed slightly. "Mr. Voroshilov discovered missing documents this morning. He very upset." That's when it clicked. I was being set up. Last night at dinner, when I went to the bathroom, he must have planted something in my briefcase. But why? Our deal was legitimate. It made no sense. After the interrogation, they took me to a holding cell. It was about 8 by 10 feet, concrete walls, a metal toilet in the corner with no privacy, and a thin mattress on a metal frame. There were 2 other guys in there. One passed out drunk, the other a skinny kid who looked terrified. Neither spoke English. I spent that night curled up on the edge of the mattress, trying not to touch anything. The cell stank of urine and body odor. Sleep was impossible between the constant noise, the hard surface, and my racing thoughts. What was happening to me? Would anyone even know where I was? The next morning, I was allowed to make one phone call. I called the U.S. Embassy, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained my situation to someone named Sarah in the Consular Services Department. She seemed concerned but not shocked, like this wasn't the first time she'd heard of an American being detained under suspicious circumstances. "Mr. Reed, try to stay calm. We'll send someone over, but these things take time. Don't sign anything you don't understand, and don't admit to anything you didn't do." That call was my lifeline. Knowing someone knew where I was, that I wasn't completely alone, helped me keep it together. Later that day, I was transferred to Butyrka, one of Moscow's oldest and most notorious prisons. The processing there was even more dehumanizing. Strip search, delousing shower, handed a set of faded blue prison clothes that smelled like they hadn't been washed in months. The whole time guards shouted at me in Russian, shoving me when I didn't understand their commands. My cell in Butyrka was somehow worse than the police station. Designed for 4 people, it housed 8 of us. Bunk beds lined the walls, with barely enough floor space to walk between them. A single barred window let in minimal light, and the toilet was just a hole in the floor behind a waist-high partition that offered zero privacy. My cellmates were a mix. 2 guys in for drugs, 1 for fraud. Others I couldn't understand what they'd done. Only one spoke broken English, Oleg, a middle-aged guy who'd worked as a tour guide before getting caught up in some scam. He became my translator and explained how things worked. "American? Bad luck, my friend," he said when I told him my story. "They use you for something. Maybe exchange, maybe politics, maybe just money." The daily routine was mind-numbing. Wake up at 6 a.m., breakfast, watery porridge and stale bread, yard time, a concrete pen where we walked in circles for 30 minutes, lunch, cabbage soup and more bread, then nothing until dinner, usually potatoes and occasionally some mysterious meat. The rest of the time we just sat in the cell, sometimes playing cards with decks so dirty and worn the suits were barely visible. The embassy lawyer, Timothy, finally came to see me after 3 days. He was a serious guy in his 40s, with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetually concerned expression. The meeting room was small, with a guard stationed by the door who pretended not to listen. "The charges against you are serious, Mr. Reed," Timothy explained. "Industrial espionage carries up to 20 years here, but something doesn't add up. Sovintech's complaint is very specific. They claim you stole technical specifications for a security system they're developing. It's exactly the kind of thing your company would be interested in." "I didn't steal anything," I insisted. "Mikhail must have planted those documents while I was in the bathroom at dinner. We need to check the restaurant's security footage." Timothy nodded. "Already working on it, but Russian authorities aren't exactly cooperative with these requests, and Voroshilov is well connected." What he didn't say, but I could tell he was thinking, was that this could take months or even years to resolve. I might be stuck in this hellhole indefinitely. The thought made me physically sick. The worst days were when water didn't run, which happened at least twice a week. No shower, no flushing the toilet, barely enough to drink. The cell would quickly become unbearable, especially with 8 grown men crammed into it. Fights broke out over nothing. A misplaced item, someone snoring too loudly. I stayed out of it as much as possible, but still got a black eye and cracked rib when I accidentally stepped on someone's territory on the floor. Food was another constant struggle. The prison meals were barely enough to survive on, and you could buy additional food from the commissary if you had money in your account. The embassy deposited some funds for me, but items in the commissary were ridiculously overpriced, and other inmates would constantly pressure you to share. The second week, I developed a fever and cough. The prison doctor, if you could call him that, gave me some pills without even explaining what they were. They made me dizzy, but did nothing for the cough. I lost track of how much weight I dropped during those weeks. My clothes hung off me like I was a scarecrow. Through all this, I kept going over and over what happened that night with Mikhail. Why set me up? What was the end game? Timothy had theories. Maybe Soventech never intended to partner with us, but wanted to steal our technology by getting access through the negotiations. Maybe Mikhail was under pressure from competitors or government interests. Or maybe it was just about money, a setup followed by a demand for a bribe to make it all go away. 3 weeks in, Timothy visited with news that gave me the first glimmer of hope. "We got the restaurant footage," he said, trying to contain his excitement. "It took calling in several favors and navigating a maze of bureaucracy, but we have it. And it clearly shows Voroshilov slipping documents into your briefcase while you're away from the table." I nearly collapsed with relief. "So I can go home now?" Timothy shook his head. "It's not that simple. The prosecutor is claiming the footage could be doctored, and Voroshilov is sticking to his story. But this is huge. It creates reasonable doubt." The next few days were a bizarre mix of renewed hope and continued despair. I still had to endure the same prison conditions, but now with the knowledge that there was actual evidence of my innocence. Timothy worked tirelessly, bringing the footage to the judge, filing motions, pressuring the prosecutor. Finally, after 31 days in prison, I was called to the administrative office. Timothy was there, along with a court official and a translator. They explained that the charges were being temporarily suspended, pending further investigation. Not dropped, not dismissed, just suspended. But it meant I could leave. The process of being released was almost as disorienting as being arrested. I was given back my original clothes, now smelling musty after a month in storage, and my personal belongings. My phone was dead, my wallet emptied of cash, though credit cards remained, and my watch mysteriously missing its band. Timothy escorted me directly to the embassy, where I was checked by a doctor, given a proper meal, and allowed to shower and call home. My parents had been frantic despite the embassy's updates. My company had been supportive, but clearly concerned about the implications for their business. "What happened to Mikhail?" I asked Timothy as we waited for my emergency passport to be processed. "Nothing yet," he said grimly. "He's still at Soventech, still denying everything. The company is backing him completely, but now that you're out, we can pursue this through other channels, civil litigation, diplomatic pressure." I flew out of Moscow the next day, escorted by embassy staff all the way to the gate. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to be rearrested. Only when the plane lifted off did I finally let myself exhale. That was 4 months ago. I'm back in Boston now, trying to piece my life back together. My company put me on paid leave. They believe me, but the whole situation has created complications with their international operations. I'm seeing a therapist twice a week for PTSD and taking medication to help me sleep. The legal battle continues. Our lawyers are working with international authorities to clear my name completely and possibly bring charges against Mikhail and Soventech. The FBI interviewed me about potential corporate espionage targeting American companies. It's all moving at a glacial pace. I still don't know exactly why I was targeted. Was it just about stealing our technology? Was Mikhail working alone or part of something bigger? Was it personal somehow? These questions keep me up at night. The hardest part is that ordinary things now trigger panic attacks. The sound of keys jangling reminds me of guards approaching. The smell of cabbage turns my stomach. Small enclosed spaces like elevators make me break out in cold sweats. I find myself checking and rechecking that my doors are locked, terrified of being taken by surprise again. I haven't told many people the full story. It's hard to explain what it feels like to have your freedom stripped away, to be completely powerless in a system designed to break you. How do you describe the specific smell of a prison cell to someone who's never experienced it? Or the unique terror of being interrogated in a language you don't understand? Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever feel normal again, if I'll ever be able to travel for business without panic setting in, if I'll stop flinching when someone approaches me from behind. Moscow was supposed to be a 4-day business trip. Instead, it was 31 days of hell that changed everything. And the worst part is that it could happen again, to me or anyone else. That's what keeps me awake at night. I've been home for 3 weeks now, but I still wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced someone is standing outside my bedroom door. My therapist says it's just anxiety from what happened in Greece, but I'm not so sure. I need to write this down somewhere, maybe to make sense of it all, or just to convince myself I'm not going crazy. It was supposed to be my dream trip. I'd saved for 2 years to visit Greece, Athens, Santorini, Mykonos, the whole Mediterranean fantasy. I'm 28, single, and work as a graphic designer in Portland. I've always traveled with friends before, but everyone was broke or busy, so I decided to go solo. You'll meet people at hostels, my friend Jess said. It'll be an adventure. Yeah, an adventure. That's one way to put it. My first 3 days in Athens were everything I hoped for. I visited the Acropolis, wandered through Plaka eating souvlaki, and spent evenings on rooftop bars overlooking the city. I was staying at this nice hotel in Monastiraki, not super fancy, but clean and safe. Or so I thought. On my 4th morning, I woke up around 8 a.m., still a bit jet-lagged. I reached for my phone on the nightstand to check the time, but it wasn't there. Groggy and confused, I sat up and looked around. My bag, the small crossbody I'd been carrying everywhere with my passport, wallet, phone, and hotel key card, was gone. At first, I thought I was being stupid, that I'd moved it somewhere else before falling asleep. I checked under the bed, in the bathroom, under the desk. Nothing. I pulled apart the sheets, looked in every drawer. My stomach sank as reality hit me. Someone had been in my room while I slept. The door had an electronic lock that was supposed to beep when opened. How had I not heard anything? Did they use the hotel master key? Did I forget to fully close the door? I tried to remember if I'd had more than the 2 glasses of wine at dinner. I went down to the front desk in my pajamas, trying not to cry. The receptionist, a young guy with gelled hair, looked alarmed when I told him what happened. "Are you sure it's not in your room, miss?" he kept asking, like I was some ditzy tourist who misplaced her things. "Yes, I'm sure," I snapped. "Someone was in my room last night. They took everything." He called the manager, a middle-aged woman named Elena, who seemed more concerned. She immediately called the police while I sat in the lobby, arms wrapped around myself, feeling naked without my phone. I couldn't even call my parents or check my bank accounts to freeze my cards. 2 police officers arrived about 40 minutes later. They took my statement in the hotel's small office, but I could tell from their expressions they weren't optimistic. "This happens often in tourist areas," the older officer said with a heavy accent. Professional thieves, very quiet. They know which hotels have old security systems. "Will you find my stuff?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He gave me a look that was almost pitying. "We will file report, but honestly, miss, your things are probably already sold." They told me I should go to the American Embassy for help with my passport. Elena let me use the hotel phone to call my parents, who were freaked out, but relieved I was physically okay. They promised to wire money through Western Union. The hotel let me stay one more night for free while I sorted things out, which was decent of them. That night I pushed a chair against the door handle and barely slept. The next morning I took a taxi to the embassy using cash Elena had advanced me against my parents' wire transfer. The embassy staff were helpful, if overworked. They see this all the time, apparently, Americans stranded without passports. They took my photo for an emergency temporary passport and told me it would take 3-5 business days to process. 5 days. I'd planned to be on Santorini by then. They gave me a small emergency loan and a list of cheap hostels where I could stay. My hotel couldn't extend my stay because they were fully booked, so I ended up at this place called Athena Hostel in Siri, a supposedly hip neighborhood that felt shadier than the guidebook suggested. The hostel was basic, a converted apartment building with narrow hallways, shared bathrooms, and small rooms with bunk beds. I got a single room with just one bed for a little extra privacy. The woman at reception, Maria, was nice enough and gave me a map with some safe areas marked. That first night at the hostel, I was emotionally exhausted, but trying to make the best of it. I'd canceled all my credit cards using the hostel's computer, emailed my boss to explain the situation, and updated my parents. I decided to grab dinner at a nearby taverna Maria recommended. The food was good, moussaka and a glass of house wine, but I couldn't shake this feeling of vulnerability. Without my phone, I felt disconnected and exposed. I kept thinking everyone was looking at me, judging the solo female traveler who couldn't even keep her stuff safe. I paid and headed back to the hostel around 9 p.m. The streets were still busy with tourists and locals, which was comforting. As I walked, I noticed a man across the street who seemed to be walking at exactly my pace. Probably nothing, but after being robbed, my paranoia was on high alert. I sped up, and after a block or two, I didn't see him anymore. Back at the hostel, I took a quick shower in the shared bathroom and returned to my room. The walls were thin, and I could hear other guests talking and moving around. I tried reading the paperback I'd thankfully left in my suitcase, but couldn't focus. Around midnight, most of the noise had died down. I was drifting off when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my door. Not unusual in a hostel, but these footsteps stopped right outside my room. I froze, listening. No sounds of a key or someone entering another room nearby. Just silence. After what felt like minutes, I got up and peeked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I chalked it up to my nerves and went back to bed. But sleep was difficult. I kept jerking awake at every little sound. The next morning I went to a cafe with Wi-Fi to use my laptop, thank God it had been in my larger suitcase, and figure out my next steps. I was updating my parents when I had that familiar prickly feeling of being watched. I casually looked around and spotted a man, maybe in his 40s, staring at me from across the cafe. He immediately looked down at his newspaper when our eyes met. He was average height, with salt and pepper hair, and wore a button-down shirt. Nothing particularly memorable except for the intensity of his gaze. I told myself he was probably just another tourist, maybe even checking me out in a normal way, but something felt off. I stayed at the cafe for another hour, and when I got up to leave, I noticed he did too. My heart rate doubled. I pretended to forget something and sat back down. He hesitated, then left without looking at me again. I waited 15 minutes before leaving, taking a roundabout way back to the hostel and checking behind me frequently. No sign of him. That afternoon I went to the embassy to check on my passport. They said it was processing normally but wouldn't be ready for at least 2 more days. I felt deflated. The thought of 2 more nights in that hostel jumping at every sound was unbearable. I decided to treat myself to lunch at a nice restaurant in Plaka to lift my spirits. As I walked through the crowded tourist area, that familiar sensation returned, eyes on my back. I turned quickly and scanned the crowd but saw nothing unusual. Just tourists taking pictures of the ancient buildings, locals selling souvenirs, normal Athens activity. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. I chose a restaurant with outdoor seating where I could watch people passing by. I ordered a Greek salad and tried to relax, people watching and pretending I was still on my dream vacation. As I was finishing my meal, I noticed a different man walking past slowly, looking right at me. He was younger, maybe early 30s, with dark hair and sunglasses. He smiled slightly when our eyes met, and my blood went cold. It wasn't a friendly tourist smile or a flirtatious one. It was knowing, almost smug. I paid quickly and practically ran back to the busy main street, weaving through crowds, taking random turns, trying to lose anyone who might be following me. By the time I got back to the hostel, I was sweating and on the verge of tears. Maria noticed my distress when I burst through the door. "Are you okay?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. "I think someone's following me," I blurted out. She frowned. "Following you? Did you see the same person multiple times?" When I explained about the different men, she looked skeptical. "Maybe it's just because you're alone and nervous after being robbed. Athens is full of tourists looking at each other." She was right logically, but logic wasn't calming the hammering in my chest. That night I heard the footsteps again. Same pattern. Stopping outside my door, lingering, then silence. This time I counted to 10 and yanked the door open quickly, expecting to catch someone. The hallway was empty. I stuck my head out and looked both ways. Nothing. But the hallway was long with a turn at the end. Someone could have easily disappeared around the corner. I closed and locked my door, pushing the room's small desk in front of it. Sleep was impossible. Every creak, every distant door closing jolted me awake. Around 3 a.m., I heard a soft scratching at my door, like fingernails gently dragging across the wood. I froze, not even breathing. It continued for maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. I didn't check the hallway this time. The next morning, I was a mess, dark circles under my eyes, jumping at every sound. I went to a different cafe far from yesterday's, bringing my laptop to research flights home. I needed to get out of Athens as soon as I had my temporary passport. As I scrolled through flight options, I felt it again, eyes boring into the back of my head. Slowly, I turned. 2 tables away sat the same older man from the cafe yesterday. Same salt and pepper hair, same button-down shirt. This time, he didn't look away. He held my gaze for a long, uncomfortable moment, then smiled slightly. I slammed my laptop closed, threw cash on the table, and left. I heard the scrape of his chair behind me, but didn't look back. I walked quickly toward a busy street market, weaving through stalls of olives, spices, and tourist trinkets. When I felt safe enough to look back, he was gone, or hiding, or I was losing my mind. I spent the rest of the day at the embassy, pretending I had more paperwork questions, just to stay in a secure building with guards and cameras. The staff probably thought I was nuts, but I didn't care. By late afternoon, I had to leave. I decided to take a taxi directly back to the hostel rather than walk. As the driver navigated through traffic, I kept checking the rearview mirror. No cars seemed to be following us consistently. Back at the hostel, Maria wasn't at the desk. Instead, there was a young guy I hadn't seen before. I hurried to my room, locked the door, and wedged the chair under the handle again. I was sitting on my bed, trying to distract myself with my book, when my laptop chimed with an email notification. It was the embassy. My temporary passport would be ready tomorrow afternoon. I could book a flight for the next day. The relief was overwhelming. I immediately booked the first available flight to the U.S. for the following evening, not caring about the extortionate last-minute fare. My parents had wired enough money to cover it. That night, the footsteps came again, and the scratching. But this time, there was something new, a whisper, so faint I almost missed it. Molly, just my name, barely audible through the door. I covered my mouth to keep from screaming. How did they know my name? I sat frozen on my bed, the desk still barricading my door, until morning light filtered through the thin curtains. I must have dozed off eventually because I jerked awake to the sound of the hostel coming to life. Showers running, doors opening and closing, voices in the hallway. I waited until I heard lots of activity before moving the desk and stepping into the hallway. The bathroom was occupied, so I stood waiting, avoiding eye contact with other sleepy travelers. When the bathroom door opened, a tall guy with a backpack came out. He nodded at me and said, "All yours." As I passed him, he added, "Sleep well, Molly?" I stopped cold. "What did you say?" He looked confused. I said, "Sleep well." "Sorry, was that weird?" "How do you know my name?" His eyebrows shot up. "I don't. I didn't use your name." I stared at him, trying to process. Had I misheard? Was I so sleep-deprived I was hallucinating? "Sorry," I mumbled. I thought, never mind. I locked myself in the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and tried to calm down. Just one more day, get the passport, go to the airport, get home. I checked out of the hostel that morning, telling Maria I'd be leaving that evening. She seemed relieved, probably thinking I was unstable. I stored my suitcase in their luggage room and headed straight to the embassy. 3 hours later, temporary passport in hand, I felt the first real relief in days. I went to a restaurant near the embassy for a late lunch, purposely staying in the tourist-heavy area where I felt marginally safer. As I ate, I became aware of someone sitting at the table behind me. Without turning, I listened to them ordering in English with an American accent, just another tourist. But something made the hair on my arms stand up. I casually turned as if looking for the waiter and saw him, the younger man with the dark hair and sunglasses from Plaka. He was looking right at me, that same knowing smile on his face. I threw money on the table and left immediately, not even waiting for change. Outside, I hailed a taxi and told the driver to take me to the airport, even though my flight wasn't for another 5 hours. I'd rather wait there, surrounded by security, than spend another minute in the city. At the airport, I checked in early and went straight through security to the departures area. Sitting at my gate, watching planes take off and land, I finally began to breathe normally again. Then I saw him. The older man with salt and pepper hair was standing by a duty-free shop about 50 yards away, staring directly at me. My heart nearly stopped. How had he known which flight I was taking? How had he gotten through security? I looked around frantically for airport security, but when I looked back, he was gone. I got up and moved to a different seating area, choosing a spot where my back was against a wall so I could see anyone approaching. For the next 3 hours, I sat rigid with fear, scanning every face that passed. I didn't see either man again, but that didn't calm me. When they finally called my flight for boarding, I was among the first in line, desperate to get on the plane. As I handed my boarding pass to the gate agent, I glanced back one last time at the terminal. There, standing just at the edge of the crowd, were both men, the older one and the younger one, side by side, watching me. Neither was trying to board. They just stood there, staring, as if saying goodbye. The younger one raised his hand slightly, a small wave. I practically ran down the jetway. During the 11-hour flight home, I kept checking to see if either man was on board. They weren't, at least not that I could see. I didn't sleep, couldn't eat, just sat with my thoughts racing. Who were they? What did they want? Why me? It's been 3 weeks now. I've told the police here, but without names or real evidence of an actual crime, there's nothing they can do. I've scoured online forums about scams in Greece, looking for similar stories. My therapist thinks they were opportunistic thieves who targeted me after the initial robbery, seeing me as vulnerable, and that my anxiety magnified ordinary interactions into something sinister. Maybe she's right. Maybe I did overreact to normal tourist interactions because I was already traumatized by the theft. But that doesn't explain the whisper through my door. It doesn't explain how they knew which flight I was taking. And it definitely doesn't explain what happened yesterday. I got a friend request on Facebook from someone with no profile picture and no personal information. Just a name. Athens Memories. I blocked the account immediately, but an hour later, an email arrived in my personal inbox, the one that isn't linked to any social media. The subject line, "Sleep well, Molly?" The body of the email was empty, except for a photo attachment. It was a picture of me, sleeping in my hostel bed in Athens, taken from the doorway of my room. I've changed all my passwords. I've put new locks on my apartment door. I've filed another police report, but I know none of it will matter. They found me once. They'll find me again. I still can't sleep through the night. Every time I close my eyes, I see their faces, especially the tall one with the scar. It's been 8 months now, but my hands still shake when I think about what happened. I wasn't planning to share this, but my therapist thinks writing it out might help. Maybe someone here has gone through something similar and can tell me how to stop jumping at every sound. This happened last October when I was driving from Chicago to my parents' place in Nebraska. I'm not a fan of long drives, but flying was expensive, and Dad had been having some health issues. It was around 9 p.m., and I'd been on the road for about 6 hours straight. My back was killing me, and I desperately needed to use the bathroom. I spotted a sign for a rest area about 2 miles ahead and decided to pull in. It was one of those older rest stops, not the nice ones with the food courts and gift shops, just a small building with bathrooms, a few picnic tables, and some vending machines. The kind of place most people would drive past if they could. The parking lot was dimly lit with those yellowish lights that barely illuminate anything. There were maybe 5 or 6 other vehicles scattered around, a couple of sedans, an RV, and a semi-truck parked way in the back, away from the main building. I didn't think much of it at the time. Truckers often park away from others so they can sleep without being disturbed. I parked near the bathroom building, got out, and stretched. The October air was chilly, and I remember thinking I should have worn a heavier jacket. The place was eerily quiet. No crickets, no distant highway noise, nothing but the occasional rumble from the vending machines. After using the bathroom, I decided to grab a snack from the vending machine. As I was feeding dollar bills into the machine, I heard something. It was faint, so faint I thought I might be imagining it. a muffled sound like someone crying. I froze, candy bar forgotten, and listened harder. There it was again, definitely a human sound, coming from the direction of the parking lot. My first thought was that maybe someone was having an argument in their car, but it didn't sound like that. It sounded desperate. Against my better judgment, I walked back outside. The sound seemed to be coming from the semi-truck parked in the far corner. As I got closer, I realized the back door of the trailer was slightly ajar, just a few inches, and the crying was definitely coming from inside. I stood there for what felt like forever, debating what to do. Call the police? But what would I say? I heard crying from a truck. I didn't even know for sure if someone was in trouble. It could have been a TV show playing on someone's phone for all I knew. Finally, I decided to approach. The gap in the door was small, but I could see movement inside. "Hello?" I called out, keeping my voice low. "Is everything okay in there?" The crying stopped immediately, replaced by a silence so absolute I could hear my own heartbeat. Then a woman's voice, barely above a whisper, "Help me, please help me." My blood ran cold. I stepped closer and peered through the gap. It was dark inside, but I could make out a figure huddled against the wall of the trailer. A woman, maybe in her late 20s, with her hands bound behind her back and what looked like duct tape partially covering her mouth. "Oh my God," I whispered. "What happened? Who did this to you?" She tried to speak, but her words were muffled by the tape. I looked around frantically. The rest area was still quiet. No one was around. I pulled out my phone to call 911, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. Just my luck. I had to make a decision. I couldn't just leave her there. I pulled the trailer door open wider, wincing at the creaking sound it made. "I'm going to help you," I told her. "My name's Mitchell." "They're coming back," she managed to say, her eyes wide with terror. "You need to leave. Now." But it was too late. I heard footsteps on the gravel behind me, heavy, purposeful footsteps. I turned around slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. 3 men stood there watching me. The one in front was tall, at least 6'4", with broad shoulders and muscular arms. He had a scar that ran from his right eye down to the corner of his mouth, pulling his lip into a permanent sneer. The other 2 were shorter, but looked just as dangerous. One had a buzz cut and was wearing a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. The third guy was older, maybe in his 50s, with a gray beard and cold, emotionless eyes. "Can we help you with something?" the tall one asked, his voice surprisingly calm and polite. But his eyes were like nothing I'd ever seen before. Dead, empty. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "I heard something. Thought someone might need help." The tall man glanced at his companions, then back at me. "That's mighty neighborly of you," he said, taking a step closer. "But everything's fine here. Just transporting some cargo." "There's a woman in your truck," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "She's tied up." The tall man's face hardened. "You should have minded your own business, friend." What happened next is still a blur. The man with the buzz cut lunged at me. I tried to run, but the older man grabbed me from behind. I fought back, landed a solid punch on Buzzcut's jaw, but I was outnumbered. The tall man hit me hard in the stomach, knocking the wind out of me. As I doubled over, gasping for breath, Buzzcut slammed something hard against the back of my head. I don't know how long I was out. Couldn't have been more than a few minutes. When I came to, I was inside the truck, my hands zip-tied behind my back. My head was throbbing, and I could feel something warm and sticky running down my neck. Blood. It was dark, but I could make out the woman sitting across from me, Up close I could see her more clearly. Brown hair matted with sweat, dark circles under her eyes, clothes dirty and torn. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry they got you too." "What's your name?" I asked, trying to keep my voice low. "Emily," she said. "They took me 3 days ago from a gas station in Missouri." I shifted, trying to get more comfortable, and realized my feet weren't bound. Maybe they'd been in a hurry. "Do you know what they want? Where they're taking us?" Emily shook her head. "They don't talk much around me, just enough to—" She trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. Enough to threaten her, to scare her. "We need to get out of here," I said, looking around for anything that might help us. The trailer was mostly empty except for some boxes stacked in the corner and what looked like tools scattered on the floor. "Can you move closer to me? Maybe I can untie you." Emily scooted toward me, turning so her back was to mine. I fumbled with the knots on her wrists, but it was slow going with my own hands tied. Outside, I could hear the men talking. Their voices were muffled, but they sounded angry, arguing about what to do with me, probably. "How many stops have they made with you?" I asked, still working on her bindings. "A few," Emily said. "Always at night, always at empty places like this. I think they're taking me somewhere specific. I overheard them talking about a delivery." The word made my skin crawl. Human trafficking. It had to be. These men were traffickers, and Emily was their merchandise. And now, I guess, so was I. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I managed to loosen Emily's restraints enough for her to slip her hands free. She immediately turned and started working on my zip ties. "We need a plan," I whispered. "My car's still out there. If we can get to it." The door to the trailer suddenly swung open, flooding the space with harsh light. The man with the buzz cut stood there, a cigarette dangling from his lips. "Boss says we're moving out," he said, then noticed Emily's unbound hands. "What the—" Without thinking, I kicked out with both feet, catching him in the knees. He stumbled, dropping his cigarette. Emily scrambled past him, pushing him off balance. I followed, still unable to use my hands, but desperate to escape. As I passed the fallen man, I spotted something metal glinting on the floor of the trailer, a tire iron. I managed to grab it awkwardly between my bound hands. When Buzzcut lunged at me, I swung it with all my might, connecting with the side of his head. He went down hard. Emily was already running toward the parking lot. I followed, heart pounding in my ears. "My car!" I shouted. "The blue Honda!" I heard shouting behind us. The other 2 men had spotted us. The tall one was running after us, moving faster than someone his size should be able to move. Emily reached my car first and yanked at the door handle. "It's locked!" she cried. My keys were in my pocket, but with my hands tied behind my back, I couldn't reach them. "Front right pocket!" I yelled as I reached her. She dug into my pocket and pulled out the keys, her hands shaking so badly she dropped them. The tall man was closing in, his face contorted with rage. Emily scooped up the keys and hit the unlock button. The car's lights flashed. We both dove in, me in the passenger seat, Emily behind the wheel. She fumbled with the keys, trying to get them into the ignition. The tall man reached the car and slammed his fist against the window. The glass held, but it wouldn't for long. "Hurry!" I shouted as the man began pounding harder. The engine roared to life. Emily threw the car into reverse, nearly hitting the older man who had appeared behind us. She shifted to drive and floored it, tires squealing as we shot forward. In the rearview mirror, I could see the tall man running after us for a few steps before stopping and yelling something to his companion. They were heading back to their truck. They were going to follow us. "Cut me loose," I said, twisting in my seat. "There's a pocket knife in the glove compartment." Emily reached over and popped open the glove box, finding the knife. She managed to cut through the zip ties while still driving, which was terrifying but necessary. As soon as my hands were free, I took over driving. "We need to find a police station," I said, pushing the car as fast as I dared on the dark highway. "Or at least somewhere with people." Emily was huddled in the passenger seat, shivering despite the heater blasting. "They'll be coming after us," she said. "They won't let us go easily." I checked the rearview mirror constantly, looking for headlights. For nearly 20 minutes, we saw nothing. Then, in the distance, I spotted them, high beams gaining on us rapidly. "They're behind us," I said, my mouth dry with fear. Emily twisted in her seat to look. "It's them," she confirmed, her voice breaking. "What do we do?" I pushed the accelerator harder, but my Honda was no match for their truck. They were getting closer with each passing minute. The highway stretched ahead of us, empty and dark, with no exits or towns in sight. Just when I thought they would catch us, I spotted a sign for a small town, Millerville, population 1-200, next exit 2 miles. I took the exit, tires screeching as I made the turn too fast. The road led to a main street lined with closed shops and darkened windows. But at the end of the street, like a beacon of hope, was a lit-up building with a few cars parked outside, a 24-hour diner. I pulled into the parking lot and slammed on the brakes. "Come on," I said, grabbing Emily's arm. "We need to get inside where there are witnesses." We burst into the diner, startling the handful of customers and the tired-looking waitress behind the counter. "We need help," I gasped. "Someone's after us. We need to call the police." The waitress took one look at our disheveled appearance, Emily's torn clothes, my blood-stained shirt, and reached for the phone. "What happened to you two?" she asked as she dialed. Before I could answer, headlights swept across the diner windows. The semi-truck had pulled into the parking lot. "They're here," Emily whispered, clutching my arm so tight it hurt. But the truck didn't stop. It slowed down, and I could see the tall man's face through the window, his scar visible even from a distance. He stared at us for what felt like an eternity, his eyes burning with hatred. Then, as if making a decision, he accelerated and disappeared down the road. The police arrived 15 minutes later. We gave our statements, told them everything from the rest area to the chase. They radioed ahead to nearby towns, looking for the truck, but I knew they were long gone. These men were professionals. They wouldn't stick around to get caught. Emily told the officers she'd been abducted 3 days earlier from a gas station in Missouri. She'd stopped to use the bathroom, and they'd grabbed her in the parking lot when she returned to her car. They'd kept her drugged most of the time, so she wasn't sure where they'd taken her or where they were heading. The police drove back to the rest area, but found nothing except some blood on the ground, mine, presumably, and tire marks. The men had cleared out anything that might identify them. The officer said they'd checked security cameras at the rest area, but I didn't hold out much hope. Places like that rarely have working surveillance. Emily's family drove up from Missouri to get her. Before she left, she hugged me tight and thanked me for saving her life. I didn't feel like a hero. If anything, I felt lucky. Lucky that I'd stopped at that rest area. Lucky that we'd managed to escape. Lucky that those men had decided not to follow us into the diner. The police offered to drive me to my parents' place in Nebraska, but I insisted on driving myself. I needed the normalcy, needed to prove to myself that I could still function. But I didn't take the highway. I stuck to main roads, only stopping in busy places, jumping at every semi-truck I saw. It's been 8 months now, and the police still haven't found those men. Emily and I keep in touch. Trauma bonds people in strange ways. She's in therapy, like me, trying to put her life back together. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I hear crying from outside my window. Sometimes I see the tall man's face in crowds. I don't know why those men took Emily or what they planned to do with her. I don't know why they ran instead of coming after us in the diner. All I know is that I can't drive past a rest area without my heart racing, and I can't see a semi-truck without checking if the tall man with the scar is behind the wheel. I saved someone's life that night, but I lost something too. My sense of safety, my belief that the world is generally good. I still don't know if what I did was brave or just stupid. All I know is that I couldn't have lived with myself if I'd ignored those cries for help, even if it almost cost me everything. I've been a truck driver for almost 15 years now, hauling freight through some of the most isolated stretches of the American Northwest. Montana's my usual route. Beautiful country, but man, those roads can get lonely. You develop routines to stay safe out there. One of mine was never, and I mean never, picking up hitchhikers. Until 3 months ago when I broke that rule. I still haven't slept right since. It was late October, that time when Montana starts getting seriously cold after dark. I was on a rural stretch of Highway 2, maybe 70 miles west of Havre. The sun was starting to sink, painting everything in that golden orange light that makes even the empty plains look magical. I'd been driving since 4 a.m. and was planning to stop in the next town for the night. That's when I spotted him. Just a small figure with his thumb out on the roadside. Normally, I wouldn't even slow down, but something about him made me pause. Maybe it was how young he looked in my headlights, or maybe it was the temperature dropping into the 30s. Whatever it was, I eased off the gas. I pulled over about 20 feet ahead of him, watching in my side mirror as he jogged up to my rig. He looked early 20s, with a scraggly beard and a worn backpack. Nothing immediately alarming. My window was already down, and I called out, "Where you headed?" "Next town would be amazing," he said, his breath visible in the cold air. "Been out here for hours." I hesitated for a second. Every instinct from years on the road was screaming at me not to do this, but the sun was fading fast, and the thought of leaving some kid to freeze overnight didn't sit right. "Hop in," I said, immediately wondering if I'd regret it. He climbed up, bringing a blast of cold air into the cab. Up close, he looked even younger, maybe 22 at most. His clothes were worn but not filthy, and he didn't smell like booze, which was a good sign. "I'm Jake," he said, extending his hand. "Liam," I replied, shaking it briefly before putting the truck back in gear. His hand was ice cold. "What brings you out to the middle of nowhere?" "Just traveling," he said. "Seeing the country, you know, trying to get to Seattle eventually." I nodded, pulling back onto the empty highway. "Well, I can get you to the next town at least. Should be there in about an hour." He seemed grateful, settling into the passenger seat and placing his backpack between his feet. For a while, things were normal. We chatted casually about nothing important, the weather, the landscape, general stuff. He said he was from Ohio originally, but had been traveling for a few months. I told him about some of my regular routes. But as daylight faded completely and we were driving through pitch darkness with just my headlights cutting through it, something changed. I first noticed it when I glanced over during a lull in conversation. Jake was sitting differently, more rigid, his eyes constantly moving around the cab, looking at the controls, the doors, then at me, then back to the road. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah, fine," he said quickly. Too quickly. His voice had changed too, tighter, more clipped. My truck's CB radio crackled with some chatter from other drivers, and Jake visibly flinched at the sound. That's when I started to get really uneasy. The conversation dried up, and we drove in silence for another 15 minutes or so. Every time I glanced over, he seemed to be studying something different: the gear shift, the dashboard, the door locks. I tried to calm myself down. Maybe the kid was just nervous. Maybe he had social anxiety. But my gut was screaming that something was wrong. I decided to make an excuse to drop him off early, say I needed to take a different route or something. "So, Jake," I started. That's when it happened. In one quick motion, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a knife. Not some little pocket knife, but a serious hunting blade, maybe 8 inches long. "Pull over," he said quietly. His voice was completely different now, flat, cold. My heart nearly stopped. 15 years on the road, never had anything like this happen. "Whoa, take it easy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady while my mind raced through options. I said, "Pull over, now." He held the knife closer to me, and I could see it was razor sharp. I signaled and eased the truck onto the shoulder, my hands shaking. We were in absolute middle of nowhere, Montana. No houses, no lights, nothing but dark plains stretching out on both sides. "Turn it off," he ordered once we'd stopped. I shut off the engine, and suddenly it was silent, except for the ticking of the cooling engine and our breathing. "Listen, if you want money," I started. "Shut up. Get out your side and walk around to this door." I did what he said, my legs feeling like rubber. The night air hit me like a slap, bitter cold. My headlights were still on, casting long shadows across the empty road. As I walked around the front of my truck, I could see Jake watching me through the windshield, knife still in hand. When I reached the passenger side, he pushed the door open but stayed seated. "I'm taking your truck," he said. "Get in." For a second I was confused. Then I realized he wanted me in the passenger seat while he drove. My mind was spinning, trying to process what was happening. If he took me with him, my chances weren't good. Truckjackings are rare, but I'd heard stories. Drivers found days later in ditches. Seeing no choice, I climbed up. Jake immediately slid across to the driver's seat, keeping the knife pointed at me. "Don't try anything stupid," he warned. That's when I noticed something that gave me the first flicker of hope: his confusion as he looked at the dashboard. My rig isn't just any truck. It's a specialized heavy hauler with a 13-speed transmission and air brakes. Not something you can just jump in and drive if you've never handled one before. Jake stared at the controls, knife still pointed vaguely in my direction. "Start it," he commanded. I reached over and turned the key, bringing the engine to life. He looked at the gear shift like it was written in hieroglyphics. "Put it in gear," he said, his voice betraying uncertainty for the first time. This was my only advantage. He needed me, at least temporarily. My mind raced, trying to figure out how to use this. "It's complicated," I said carefully. "This isn't like driving a car. You've got to release the air brakes first, then—" "Just show me," he snapped, waving the knife closer to me. I nodded, playing along. "Okay, first this switch here releases the brakes." I pointed to one of the dashboard controls without actually touching it. "Then you need to push the clutch all the way down. It's really stiff, and shift into first." He frowned, lowering the knife slightly as he concentrated on what I was saying. I kept explaining, deliberately making it sound more complicated than it really was, watching as his frustration grew. "Just do it for me," he finally said. "All right," I agreed, reaching for the controls. This was my moment, maybe my only chance. I needed to catch him off guard. I pretended to adjust something on the dashboard, then, as casually as I could, asked, "Is this your first time stealing a semi?" The question threw him just enough. His eyes flicked to my face for a split second in surprise. That's when I lunged for the emergency brake, yanking it hard while simultaneously throwing my shoulder against the door. The door flew open, and I tumbled out onto the ground, scraping my hands and knees on the gravel shoulder. Without looking back, I scrambled to my feet and sprinted away from the road toward a small cluster of trees about 50 yards away that I'd spotted earlier. Behind me, I heard Jake yelling, but I didn't stop or turn around. I ran like I've never run before, my lungs burning in the cold air. I reached the trees, just a small stand of cottonwoods, and crashed through the underbrush, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I dropped to the ground behind the largest tree, trying to control my breathing as I peered back toward the truck. In the glow of the headlights, I could see Jake standing by the open door, looking around frantically. He started walking in my general direction, but hesitated, clearly unable to see exactly where I'd gone in the darkness. "Liam!" he shouted. "Get back here now!" I pressed myself against the tree, not daring to move. The night was silent, except for the idling truck engine and Jake's increasingly desperate shouts. After what seemed like an eternity, he turned and walked back to the truck. I watched as he climbed into the driver's seat again. The engine revved loudly. He was trying to figure out how to drive it. The truck lurched forward a few feet, then stalled. He tried again with the same result. After several attempts, the truck's lights suddenly went out. He'd either turned them off intentionally or had accidentally killed the power. Now we were both in total darkness. I couldn't see him anymore, but I could hear occasional thuds and curses from the direction of my truck. I was freezing, having left my jacket in the cab, but I didn't dare move yet. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The cold seeped into my bones as I crouched there, wondering what to do. I had no phone. It was in my jacket pocket. No weapon. Nothing. Eventually, the sounds from the truck stopped. Had Jake given up? Was he waiting for me? Or was he searching for me in the darkness? I couldn't tell, and the uncertainty was almost worse than knowing. I decided to wait him out. I had to assume he was still there, possibly watching for movement. So I stayed put, shivering violently as the temperature continued to drop. My knees ached from crouching, but I was too scared to sit on the freezing ground. After what must have been at least 2 hours, I hadn't heard any sounds from the direction of the truck for a long time. I began to think maybe Jake had given up and left on foot. The thought of my truck just sitting there, possibly with the keys still in it, was too tempting to ignore. I had to try. Moving as quietly as possible, I crept out from my hiding place. The moon had risen, providing just enough light to make out shapes. I could see my truck, a dark silhouette against the slightly lighter sky. Inch by inch, I made my way back, stopping frequently to listen. Nothing but the wind. When I got within about 20 yards, I dropped to my hands and knees, crawling the rest of the way. The gravel bit into my already scraped palms, but I hardly noticed. I reached the driver's side and slowly stood up, pressing my back against the cold metal of the truck. Still no sound from inside. Taking a deep breath, I peered through the window. Empty. Relief washed over me so intensely I nearly collapsed. I carefully opened the door, wincing at the slight creak it made. There, on the driver's seat, was Jake's knife. He'd left it behind. My jacket was still there too, and my phone inside the pocket. I grabbed the knife first, then quickly checked the rest of the cab, completely empty. No sign of Jake's backpack either. He must have taken it when he left. I locked the doors, started the engine properly, and turned the heat on full blast, my whole body shaking with cold and adrenaline. As warmth gradually returned to my limbs, I tried to decide what to do. The nearest town was still about 40 minutes away. I could call 911, but out here, help would take at least that long to arrive anyway. I decided to drive. Just get the hell out of there. I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the empty highway, constantly checking my mirrors, terrified I'd see Jake running after me. I'd gone maybe a quarter mile when my headlights caught something ahead, a figure walking along the shoulder. My heart nearly stopped. It was him. It had to be. I considered turning around, but that would mean going back into complete wilderness. Forward was my only option. As I got closer, Jake turned and saw my truck approaching. Instead of moving away, he stepped toward the road, waving his arms like he wanted me to stop. Was he insane? Did he really think I'd fall for that? I pressed on, accelerating slightly, aiming to pass him as quickly as possible. But as I drew alongside him, he made a desperate lunge for my truck. Somehow, he managed to grab onto the side mirror on the passenger side. I could see his face in my side mirror, twisted with rage and determination as he clung to the outside of my moving truck. His feet scrambled for purchase on the side step. Pure terror shot through me. I swerved slightly, trying to shake him off without completely losing control. He held on, actually starting to pull himself up toward the window. I swerved harder, the truck swaying dangerously. His grip finally broke. In my mirror, I saw him tumble onto the asphalt. I didn't slow down. I didn't look back again. I just drove, my hands clenched so tight on the steering wheel that my knuckles turned white. I drove straight to the police station in the next town, running in and probably looking like a madman. Wild-eyed, scraped up, still clutching Jake's knife as evidence. The officers were stunned but took my statement seriously. They sent patrol cars out immediately and found Jake about 8 miles from where he'd fallen, still walking along the highway. They arrested him on the spot. Turns out he had a record. Armed robbery in 2 states, assault charges. He'd been hitchhiking his way across the country, targeting isolated drivers. I wasn't his first victim, but I was the first one who got away. That was 3 months ago. I'm back on the road now, but everything's different. I installed extra locks on my doors. I carry pepper spray. I never drive after dark if I can help it. And I jump at shadows in my mirrors. The physical stuff healed fast. The scrapes on my hands and knees were gone within a week. But the other stuff... I still wake up some nights in a cold sweat, convinced there's someone in my truck with me. I still can't shake the memory of Jake's face in my mirror as he clung to the side of my moving rig, that look of pure hatred. The police told me I was lucky, said most people freeze up in situations like that. But it doesn't feel like luck. It feels like I barely escaped something horrible by the skin of my teeth. And now I'm just waiting for the next time my luck runs out. I've been driving these roads for 15 years. Never thought I'd be afraid of them. But now, every time I see someone with their thumb out, I see Jake's face. And I keep driving. I'm still trying to wrap my head around what happened to me 3 nights ago. It's not the first close call I've had in 15 years of driving truck, but it's the first time I've ever felt like someone was genuinely trying to kill me. I haul refrigerated goods across the southern states, mainly Texas, Louisiana, and sometimes up to Oklahoma. Nothing exciting, just produce, dairy, that kind of stuff. I was on a regular Austin to Houston run on Highway 59, having left late because the loading dock was backed up for hours. By the time I got on the road, it was already past 10 p.m., which meant I'd be driving through the night. I don't usually mind night driving. Less traffic, cooler temperatures, and something peaceful about having the road mostly to yourself. I had my thermos of coffee, some podcasts lined up, and was settling in for the haul. Around midnight, I was somewhere between Livingston and Cleveland, Texas. That stretch of 59 gets really dark, like pitch black except for your headlights and the occasional reflectors on the road. There weren't many other vehicles out at that hour, maybe passed a car every 10 minutes or so. I first noticed the headlights in my mirror when I was about 20 miles south of Livingston. Nothing unusual at first, just another set of lights coming up from behind. From the height and spacing of the lights, I could tell it was another semi. The truck was coming up fast, though, much faster than the speed limit. I figured they'd just pass me when they caught up. But they didn't. This rig pulled up right on my tail, couldn't have been more than 20 feet behind me. At 70 mph, that's insanely dangerous and completely against everything they teach you in trucking school. I tapped my brakes a couple times, not enough to slow down, just to flash my brake lights as a signal for them to back off. Instead of backing off, they flipped on their high beams. If you've never had high beams blasting into your mirrors from a big rig, count yourself lucky. It's absolutely blinding, especially when it's pitch black all around. The light filled my cab, bouncing off every mirror, making it nearly impossible to see the road ahead clearly. I moved to the right side of my lane to signal them to pass. There was no oncoming traffic, plenty of room to go around me. Nothing happened for about 30 seconds, then the truck finally started to move left to pass. But something wasn't right. As they pulled alongside, instead of continuing past, they began to drift into my lane. I had to swerve right to avoid getting sideswiped. My right tires hit the rumble strip on the shoulder, that loud brrrr sound vibrating through the whole truck. I corrected back onto the highway, heart suddenly pounding. Maybe they fell asleep at the wheel, I thought. But then the truck dropped back behind me again, high beams still blinding me, tailgating even closer now. I picked up my CB radio. Southbound on 59 near mile marker 432, anybody copy? Got an aggressive driver on my tail. Nothing but static. The CB has been dying for years now that everyone has cell phones. I tried speeding up, pushing my rig to 75, then 80. The truck behind me matched my speed perfectly, staying right on my tail. When I slowed down to 65, they slowed too, still right behind me. This went on for about 10 minutes, and I was starting to really freak out. My palms were sweating on the wheel. I couldn't understand what this person wanted. If they wanted to pass, I was giving them plenty of opportunity. If they wanted me to pull over, well, no way in hell was that happening in the middle of nowhere at midnight. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but out here in the piney woods, I had no signal. Just one bar that kept dropping to 0. Then the truck behind me hit my bumper. It wasn't hard, just a tap, but at 70 mph, it was enough to jolt my whole rig and send a spike of adrenaline through my system. This was deliberate. This person was trying to run me off the road. I spotted a highway sign up ahead. Rest area, 2 miles. My first thought was to just keep driving. Rest areas can be deserted at night, potentially making me more vulnerable. But if I could get to a phone, call for help, it seemed better than playing this deadly game of cat and mouse. I didn't signal, didn't want to give the other driver any warning. When the exit came up, I cut the wheel hard and took it at the last second. My trailer swayed dangerously as I hit the ramp faster than I should have. I heard my cargo shifting, something falling over inside the trailer. The rest area was dimly lit with just a few overhead lamps that cast eerie yellow circles on the pavement. There was one other vehicle parked far at the other end, looked like an RV, otherwise completely empty. I pulled in and immediately looked in my mirrors. The truck had followed me. It was a white Peterbilt with a refrigerated trailer like mine, though I couldn't make out any company logos in the darkness. As I pulled deeper into the rest area, heading toward the small building with restrooms and vending machines, The other truck slowed near the entrance. Then its headlights switched off completely. It was just sitting there at the entrance to the rest area, blocking the way I'd come in. Engine still running. I could hear the diesel rumble from where I'd parked. It was waiting, watching. I pulled my rig into a parking space, grabbed my flashlight and phone, and ran toward the building. My hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped my keys trying to lock my truck. Inside the small building, it was brightly lit but completely empty. There was a payphone on the wall. Thank God these things still exist in some places. I fumbled in my wallet for some change, fed it into the phone, and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered after 2 rings. 911, what's your emergency? I'm at a rest stop on Highway 59 southbound, about 20 miles south of Livingston, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There's a truck driver who's been following me, trying to run me off the road. He followed me into the rest area, and he's blocking the exit. Sir, are you in immediate danger? She asked. As she said that, I looked through the window and saw the truck's headlights click back on. It started moving, rolling slowly through the rest area, coming straight toward the building where I was. Yes, I said, my mouth suddenly dry. He's coming toward me now. I'm dispatching officers to your location, she said. Can you safely stay on the line? The truck was moving deliberately through the parking area, crawling along at maybe 5 attempts, headlights sweeping across the building as it turned. I don't think so, I told her. I need to get back to my truck. Please hurry. I hung up and looked around frantically. There was a back door to the building. I ran to it, pushed it open, and peered out. From here I could see my truck about 50 yards away, and beyond it, what I hadn't noticed before, a second exit from the rest area that connected to a frontage road. I made a run for my truck, keeping low between parked cars. I could hear the other truck's engine getting louder as it circled around the building. I reached my rig, hands fumbling with the keys, and hauled myself up into the cab, locking the door immediately. Through my mirrors, I could see the white Peterbilt rounding the corner of the building, headlights illuminating the spot where I'd been standing just seconds before. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped my keys twice before managing to get them in the ignition. I fired up the engine, threw it in gear, and started rolling toward that second exit as fast as my truck could accelerate. The headlights in my mirror grew larger as the Peterbilt accelerated too, closing the distance between us. I was maybe doing 15 mph in the parking area, approaching the exit that led to the frontage road. The other truck was gaining on me. I hit the frontage road and floored it, my trailer swinging wildly as I made the turn. The engine roared as it strained to build up speed. In my mirrors, the white truck burst out of the exit behind me, high beams now back on, bearing down on me like something out of a nightmare. The frontage road ran parallel to the highway for about half a mile before connecting back to it. I pushed my rig as hard as it would go, the speedometer crawling up to 45, 50, 55. The other truck was still gaining. I reached for my phone again, desperate for a signal. 1 bar. I tried to call 911 again, but the call wouldn't connect. Just as I approached the on-ramp back to the highway, I saw something that made my heart leap, flashing blue and red lights on the highway, heading northbound. Police. I laid on my horn, a long, desperate blast, as I barreled onto the highway. The police car was on the other side of the divided highway, but they must have seen me because they immediately did a U-turn through the median, lights flashing. I checked my mirror, expecting to see the white Peterbilt still on my tail, but it had vanished. Then I spotted it, pulling off onto the shoulder about a quarter mile back, its headlights shutting off again. I pulled over as the police car approached, and a second cruiser appeared, speeding past me toward the parked white truck. I was shaking uncontrollably as the officer approached my window, having to hold my hands together to steady them enough to hand over my license and registration. "You the trucker who called 911?" he asked. I nodded, suddenly exhausted as the adrenaline began to wear off. That truck back there was trying to run me off the road, been following me for miles. The officer radioed something to his colleagues, then turned back to me. "Stay here. We're going to have a chat with your friend back there." Through my side mirror, I could see the officers surrounding the white Peterbilt, guns drawn. One of them was shouting commands that I couldn't make out from this distance. They got the driver out and had him face down on the ground within minutes. I couldn't see his face or make out any details about him from where I was parked. After what seemed like forever, the officer came back to my truck. "We've got him in custody," he said. "Gonna need you to follow me to the station to make a statement." At the station, they told me they'd found a hunting rifle, a gas can, and a set of heavy chains in the guy's cab. They wouldn't tell me his name or why he'd targeted me, said it was part of an ongoing investigation. I gave my statement, they took my contact information, and eventually let me go around 4 a.m. to finish my delivery. I made it to Houston by morning, but I was a mess, jumping at every set of headlights in my mirror. It's been 3 days now, and I still haven't heard anything more from the police. I've taken a few days off work, told my dispatcher I needed some personal time. I can't bring myself to get back in that truck yet. I keep running through it all in my head, trying to figure out if I cut this guy off somewhere or if there was something about my truck that set him off. But I'm just a regular driver hauling produce. There's nothing special about me or my rig. I know I need to get back on the road soon. Bills don't pay themselves, but every time I close my eyes, I see those high beams in my mirrors, feel the jolt when he tapped my bumper. I've been driving those Texas highways for 15 years without incident, and now I don't know if I'll ever feel safe on them again. Whatever that guy's problem was, whatever made him decide to terrorize a random trucker on Highway 59, it's changed something in me. I'm jumpy, suspicious. I find myself studying every truck I see, looking for a white Peterbilt. And I can't shake this feeling that next time, because somehow I'm certain there will be a next time, those flashing police lights might not appear just when I need them. I've been driving big rigs for almost 15 years now, and after what happened last winter in the Rockies, I don't think I'll ever stop looking over my shoulder. I'm still not sleeping right. My wife says I need therapy, but how do you explain something like this to someone who wasn't there? I just needed to get this off my chest somewhere. It was early February, one of those nights where Mother Nature shows you exactly how small you are. I was hauling a load of electronics from Denver to Salt Lake City, a route I'd done maybe 100 times before. The weather report mentioned snow, but nothing prepared me for the absolute whiteout that hit around 9 p.m. while I was going through that stretch of I-70 past Vail. The temperature had dropped to something like 5 degrees Celsius, and the wind was howling so bad it felt like my Peterbilt was getting shoved sideways. Visibility was down to maybe 20 feet in front of my headlights. The plows couldn't keep up, and there was already about 8 inches of fresh powder on the road. I was crawling along at maybe 25 mph, white-knuckling the wheel, watching other trucks pulled over on the shoulder. I remember thinking I should probably just find a safe spot to pull over myself and wait it out when my headlights caught something through the wall of white. There was a car on the side of the road about 50 yards ahead, hazards blinking weakly through the snow, hood up. Just sitting there in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest exit. I'll be honest, My first instinct was to keep driving. In conditions like that, every stop is a risk. But then I thought about whoever was in that car. In that kind of cold without heat, you've got maybe a couple hours before hypothermia sets in. No cell service in that mountain pass. I couldn't just drive by knowing someone might freeze to death. So I carefully pulled my rig over about 20 yards ahead of them, put on my hazards, and grabbed my heavy coat and flashlight. The wind hit me like a physical wall when I stepped out, snow immediately coating my beard and eyebrows. I had to squint just to see where I was going as I trudged back toward the car. It was an older Buick, dark blue, I think, though it was hard to tell under all the snow. As I got closer, a figure emerged from the driver's side, a man, probably in his mid-50s, hunched against the wind in what looked like a completely inadequate jacket for the weather. He had this gray-streaked beard and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. His face was already red from the cold. "Radiator hose burst," he shouted over the wind, gesturing to the engine. "Been stuck here almost an hour." I glanced under the hood with my flashlight, and sure enough, there was antifreeze frozen all over the engine block. No fixing that on the side of the road in a blizzard. "Next town's about 30 miles, I yelled back. "I can give you a ride to somewhere warm." The relief on his face was immediate. "Thank God," he said. "I was starting to think I was going to die out here." Something in my gut twitched, just the smallest warning, but I pushed it aside. What was I going to do? Leave the guy to freeze? He grabbed a small duffel from his back seat, locked up his car, and followed me back to my truck. Once we climbed in, the sudden quiet after the howling wind was almost disorienting. The heat blasting from the vents must have felt like heaven to him. His hands were shaking as he held them up to the vent. "I can't thank you enough," he said, his breathing heavy like he'd been running. "Name's Richard." "Ben," I replied, putting the truck in gear and carefully merging back onto the interstate. "You're lucky I came along when I did. Not many people out in this mess." "Yeah," he nodded, rubbing his hands together. "Lucky." For the next 15 minutes or so, everything seemed normal. We made small talk about the storm, how he was heading to Grand Junction to visit his daughter, how his car had been giving him trouble for weeks. I remember thinking he seemed jumpy, but hell, nearly freezing to death would make anyone a little edgy. The roads were getting worse by the minute. My wipers were barely keeping up, and the defroster was working overtime to keep the windshield clear. I was completely focused on the road, trying to follow the faint tracks left by the vehicles ahead of me. That's when everything changed. I noticed Richard had gone quiet. When I glanced over, his entire demeanor had transformed. He wasn't the grateful, relieved guy from minutes before. He was sitting rigidly in his seat, staring straight ahead, this weird tension radiating off him. His right hand was inside his jacket pocket. "You doing okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual while alarm bells started going off in my head. He didn't answer immediately. Then, without looking at me, he said in this flat voice, "How much farther to the next exit?" "Probably another 15 miles in these conditions," I said, my unease growing by the second. "Why?" That's when he pulled his hand out of his pocket, and I saw he was gripping something. Before I could even process what was happening, he lunged across the cab, grabbing the steering wheel with his left hand and yanking it hard toward the guardrail. "I need this truck," he shouted, his face suddenly contorted with this manic energy. "You don't understand. I have plans. I have deadlines." The truck swerved violently on the icy road. I fought for control, my heart practically exploding in my chest as we skidded toward the edge where there was nothing but a steep drop-off beyond the guardrail. My trailer started to fishtail behind us. Pure survival instinct kicked in. I drove my elbow as hard as I could into his ribs. He let out a pained grunt, and his grip on the wheel loosened just enough for me to wrench it back and hit the brakes. The truck slid sideways for what felt like forever before finally grinding to a halt. The cab angled across both lanes. The trailer jackknifed behind us. For a split second, there was just our heavy breathing and the idle of the engine. Then I saw the glint of metal in his hand, a hunting knife with a blade that had to be 6 inches long. "Get out," he said, pointing the knife at me. His eyes were wild, pupils dilated. "Get out of the truck now." "Take it easy," I said, raising my hands slowly. My mind was racing, calculating distances to the door, to the emergency brake, to anything I could use as a weapon. "You want the truck, fine. Just let me grab my phone." "Now!" he screamed, lunging forward with the knife. I threw myself back against the door, barely avoiding the blade as it slashed through the air inches from my chest. I fumbled for the door handle behind me, pushed it open, and half fell, half jumped out into the blinding snow. The wind hit me like a physical blow. Without my coat, which was still on the passenger seat, the cold cut straight through my flannel shirt. The snow was coming down so hard I could barely see the truck from just a few feet away. Richard scrambled across the seat toward the driver's side, knife still in hand. I had seconds to decide what to do. Running meant certain death in the storm. Fighting a man with a knife weren't great odds either. As he was awkwardly repositioning himself behind the wheel, his right leg was still partially outside the cab, the door not fully closed. In that moment, I made my decision. I lunged forward and grabbed the door with both hands, then slammed it with every ounce of strength I had directly onto his leg. The scream that came out of him was something I'll never forget. The knife clattered to the floor of the cab as he howled in pain, clutching at his crushed shin. I yanked the door open again, and before he could recover, grabbed him by his jacket and literally dragged him out of my truck. He fell face first into the snow, still screaming about his leg. I kicked the knife further under the seat where he couldn't reach it, then hauled myself back into the driver's position, slammed the door, and locked it. Richard was already pushing himself up from the snow, his face a mask of rage and pain as he lunged toward the truck. I threw it in gear just as his hands slapped against my window. The tires spun on the ice before finally catching, and I pulled away, leaving him standing in the middle of the highway, screaming things I couldn't hear over the engine and the storm. I drove with my heart threatening to burst through my chest. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the wheel. Every few seconds I checked my mirrors, convinced he'd somehow materialized in my trailer or was hanging onto the back of my cab. I kept picturing his face, that sudden change from desperate gratitude to murderous intent replaying in my mind. I didn't stop, not for anything. The adrenaline kept me wide awake as I carefully navigated the treacherous roads. After what felt like an eternity but was probably about 3 hours, I finally reached a small town called Parachute. There was a truck stop with lights glowing through the snow like some kind of oasis. I pulled in and immediately went to the counter where a night clerk was watching a small TV. The look on my face must have told him something was seriously wrong, because he was already reaching for the phone before I'd finished my breathless explanation. The police arrived about 15 minutes later. I gave them a statement, described Richard, told them where I'd left him. They seemed concerned, said they'd send patrols out that way, but with the storm, it might be hours before anyone could get there. I spent the night in my truck in that well-lit parking lot, jumping at every sound, a tire iron within reach beside me. I didn't sleep a wink. The next morning the storm had passed. I called the local police station before heading out. They told me they'd searched the area but found no sign of the man I'd described. No abandoned Buick either. Just endless white snow covering the mountain pass. They took my contact information and said they'd be in touch if anything turned up. That was 10 months ago. I never heard back from them. Sometimes I wonder if they thought I was just some exhausted trucker who'd hallucinated the whole thing. Sometimes I almost convince myself that's what happened, that the stress and the storm played tricks on my mind. But then I remember the cold metal of that knife catching the light from my dashboard, the look in his eyes when he lunged for the wheel, the feel of the door crushing against his leg, and that inhuman scream. Those things were real. I still drive routes through the Rockies when I have to, but never at night anymore, and never in bad weather. I've passed by stranded motorists since then, and the guilt eats at me every time I radio their position in to highway patrol instead of stopping to help. My wife doesn't understand why I installed extra locks on our doors, or why I keep checking the windows when the weather turns bad. I've looked through missing persons reports, scanned news stories about highway robberies or murders along I-70. Nothing that matches what happened that night. No reports of a man fitting his description being found frozen to death either. Sometimes when I'm driving and see snow starting to fall, I catch myself looking for a dark blue Buick on the side of the road, or checking my mirrors for a face I hope I never see again. I don't know what plans Richard had for my truck and its cargo. Maybe simple theft, maybe something worse. All I know is that somewhere out there's a man with a limp who knows my first name and what I look like. And every time a storm hits the Rockies, I wonder if he's out there with his hood up, waiting for someone else to stop. I've been driving trucks for almost 15 years now, and you hear stories from other drivers about weird stuff that happens on the road. Ghost hitchhikers, strange lights in the desert, that kind of thing. I always laughed those off. But what happened to me last October wasn't supernatural. It was worse because it was real people doing real terrible things. I'm still not sure I should be writing this down, but I need to get it off my chest. I haven't told anyone except my brother, and even he thinks I might be exaggerating. It was a Thursday night around 2 a.m. I was hauling a load of electronics from California to Texas, running I-10 through Arizona. I'd been pushing hard all day trying to make up time after getting stuck in traffic outside of Phoenix. My eyes were getting heavy, and I knew I needed caffeine to make it to my planned stop in Tucson. I pulled into this truck stop just past Eloy. Not one of the big chains. It was one of those independent places with a small convenience store attached to a diner that was closed for the night. The kind of spot that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 90s. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a couple of semis, a few cars, and this beat-up Chevy Impala parked way at the edge near some dumpsters. I parked my rig on the far side of the lot where there was plenty of space. The night was dead quiet except for the distant hum of the interstate and some cicadas going crazy in the scrub brush behind the lot. It was one of those Arizona nights where the heat of the day had finally broken, and there was almost a chill in the air. When I climbed down from my cab, I noticed my legs were stiff from sitting so long. I stretched for a minute before heading toward the store, my boots crunching on the gravel. The store lights were these harsh fluorescents that made everything look washed out, but at least they were open 24 hours. As I got closer to the entrance, I saw two guys standing near that Impala I mentioned. At first, I didn't think much of it, just two dudes talking. But something about their body language caught my attention. They were standing too close, looking too tense, and kept glancing around. One guy was tall and skinny, wearing a dark hoodie despite the Arizona heat. The other was shorter with a baseball cap and a denim jacket. I kept walking, pretending not to notice, but definitely watching from the corner of my eye. As I reached the store entrance, I saw them clearly in the reflection of the glass door. The shorter guy handed something to Hoodie, a small package wrapped in what looked like brown paper. Then Hoodie pulled out a wad of cash and counted out some bills. My first thought was, great, a drug deal. I just wanted my coffee and to get back on the road. Not my business, not my problem. Inside, there was just a clerk, young guy, maybe 20, with a scraggly beard and earbuds in, half paying attention to his phone behind the counter. I nodded at him and headed straight for the coffee station. The store smelled like old hot dogs and pine-scented cleaner. The coffee pot looked like it had been sitting there for hours, but beggars can't be choosers at 2 a.m. in the middle of nowhere. As I was pouring my coffee, I glanced out the big front windows and saw the situation outside had changed. Hoodie guy was holding the package open, looking inside, and clearly pissed off. He was gesturing angrily at the shorter guy, who had his hands up in a defensive position. Then everything went from bad to worse in about 3 seconds. Hoodie reached behind his back and pulled out a gun. Looked like a semi-automatic pistol. He pointed it at the shorter guy, who backed up against the Impala. I froze with the coffee pot in my hand, not believing what I was seeing. The shorter guy was frantically reaching into his pockets, probably for whatever money he had left. Then Hoodie looked up and straight at the store window. Our eyes met, and I knew immediately I'd screwed up. I should have walked away from the window the second I saw the gun. His face changed from angry to something colder, more calculated. He said something to the other guy and started walking toward the store entrance, gun still in hand. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. I set down the coffee pot so hard it splashed everywhere and rushed to the counter. "Hey, man," I said to the clerk, who looked up from his phone with this bored expression. "There's a guy with a gun coming in here. Call the cops now." The kid's eyes went wide. He yanked out his earbuds and fumbled for the phone under the counter. I didn't wait around to see if he got through. I was already heading for the back of the store, looking for another way out. There was a hallway past the refrigerated section with a bathroom and a door marked "Emergency Exit" at the end. I heard the electronic bell chime as the front door opened. The clerk was saying something in a shaky voice, but I couldn't make out the words. I pushed through the emergency exit, setting off an alarm, and found myself in the back of the building. It was darker back there, just a single security light, casting long shadows across a small loading area. My truck was on the opposite side of the building, and I realized I'd have to circle around to get to it. There was no way I was going back inside. I started moving along the side of the building, trying to stay in the shadows. The alarm was still blaring, and I heard shouting from inside. I was praying the clerk had gotten through to the police, but I wasn't counting on them showing up in time to help me. I had made it about halfway around the building when I heard what sounded like something heavy hitting the counter inside, followed by more shouting. I picked up my pace, no longer caring about staying quiet. I just needed to get to my truck. As I rounded the corner to the front of the building, I could see my rig sitting there about 100 yards away. I broke into a run, fumbling in my pocket for my keys. My lungs were burning, and I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears. I was maybe 20 feet from my truck when I heard the store's front door slam open. I glanced back and saw Hoodie standing there scanning the parking lot. The store's lights silhouetted him, but I could see the gun still in his hand. I reached my truck, and my hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the door. I finally managed to unlock it and hauled myself up into the cab, slamming the door behind me. I jammed the key into the ignition just as Hoodie spotted me and started running across the lot. The engine roared to life, I've never been so grateful for the sound of a diesel motor in my life. I threw it in gear and hit the gas, not even bothering with my seatbelt or lights. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning on the gravel before catching traction. As I pulled onto the access road, I heard a sharp crack, then another. At first, I thought it was rocks hitting the undercarriage, but then I realized he was shooting at me. I ducked down as low as I could while still seeing the road and floored it. I have no idea if any of the shots hit my rig. All I knew was I needed to put as much distance between me and that truck stop as possible. I hit the on-ramp to I-10 going way too fast, the trailer swaying behind me. I didn't slow down until I was doing 80 on the interstate, my hands still shaking on the wheel. For what felt like forever, I kept checking my mirrors, convinced I'd see headlights gaining on me. Every car that approached from behind made my stomach knot up. I kept thinking about that clerk. He was just a kid, and I'd left him there with an armed, angry drug dealer. The guilt was almost as bad as the fear. After about an hour of driving like a madman, I pulled into a rest area near Benson, still about 40 miles from Tucson. I parked under a bright light where I could see anyone approaching, and just sat there, trying to get my breathing under control. My shirt was soaked with sweat, and my throat felt like sandpaper. I sat there debating what to do. The right thing would be to call the police, report what happened. But what if these guys had connections? What if they could trace the report back to me somehow? I'd given the clerk my face, and my truck had my company logo and numbers all over it. If this guy was part of something bigger, could he track me down? I picked up my phone at least 5 times to call 911, but each time I ended up putting it back down. The fear won out. After about 20 minutes, I decided to keep driving. I needed to put as much distance as possible between me and whatever had happened back there. I drove straight through to El Paso without stopping, except to fuel up at a busy truck stop where I paid at the pump and didn't go inside. I didn't feel safe enough to sleep until I was across the Texas state line, and even then, I locked myself in the sleeper cab with my pocket knife within reach. The next morning, I checked the local Arizona news on my phone, looking for any reports about a shooting or robbery at a truck stop near Eloy. Nothing. Not a single mention. That almost freaked me out more than if there had been. What happened to that clerk? Did the police even show up? Did the other guy with the Impala get away? Or did Hoodie do something to him, too? I considered calling the truck stop anonymously, just to see if everyone was okay, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I was too afraid of somehow getting pulled back into whatever I'd witnessed. It's been 8 months now, and I still think about that night almost every day. I've changed my habits completely. I don't drive at night anymore if I can help it. I stick to the big, busy truck stops with security cameras and lots of people around. I've turned down loads that would take me back through that part of Arizona. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing or blew it out of proportion. But then I remember the sound of those gunshots following me out of the parking lot, and I know it was real. The worst part is not knowing. Not knowing if that clerk is okay. Not knowing if those guys got caught or if they're still out there. Not knowing if someday I'll pull into a truck stop and see that same guy in the hoodie, recognizing me as the witness who got away. I used to love the freedom of the road. Now I feel exposed out here, vulnerable. I catch myself checking my mirrors more often, not just for traffic but for anyone who might be following me. I've started carrying a baseball bat in my cab. Not the most effective protection, but it makes me feel a little safer. I never reported what happened to the police. Maybe that makes me a coward or part of the problem. I tell myself it wouldn't have made a difference, that the cops probably showed up after the alarm went off anyway. But the truth is, I was just too scared. So that's my story. Not some ghost or cryptid or whatever, just regular humans being the real monsters. I don't know what was in that package, drugs, counterfeit money, stolen goods, but whatever it wasn't worth what might have happened to that clerk or the other guy. It definitely wasn't worth the fear I still carry with me every day on the road. Be careful out there. You never know when you might accidentally witness something you weren't supposed to see, and how quickly your normal life can turn into a nightmare. I consider myself a cautious person. Always have. That's why what happened in Yosemite last month is so frustrating. I should have trusted my gut. I should have recognized the warning signs. But I didn't, and I've been having nightmares ever since. I had planned this solo hiking trip for months. With the stress of my job in San Francisco piling up and a recent breakup still weighing on me, I needed to escape somewhere beautiful and peaceful. Yosemite seemed perfect. I'd been there twice before with friends, but never alone. I was excited to experience the solitude and take my time photographing the valleys and waterfalls without having to worry about holding anyone up. I arrived at the park entrance around 5:30 a.m., just as the sun was starting to paint the eastern sky. The morning air was crisp and clean, almost painfully fresh compared to the city. I remember feeling this surge of relief as I parked at the trailhead, like I could finally breathe properly again. I double-checked my backpack, water bottles, energy bars, first aid kit, extra layers, map, fully charged phone, portable charger, everything was there. I even sent my location to my sister with a quick text about my planned route, just to be safe. The first few hours were exactly what I needed. The trail was quiet with only a few early morning hikers passing by. I stopped frequently to take photos, the way the light filtered through the trees, mist rising from the valley floor, a deer and her fawn grazing in a meadow. I felt the tension in my shoulders melting away with each mile. Around noon, I found a perfect spot by a small stream to rest and eat lunch. I was sitting on a large, flat rock, reviewing some of the photos I'd taken and munching on a sandwich when I heard voices approaching. 3 hikers, 2 women and a man, came around the bend in the trail, laughing about something. They noticed me and waved. "That looks like the perfect lunch spot," one of the women called out. She was tall and athletic-looking with a blonde ponytail. I nodded and smiled. "The water's really refreshing if you want to cool off." They introduced themselves as they approached. David, Sarah, and Emily. David was probably in his early 30s, bearded with a confident stride. Sarah was the blonde who had called out to me, and Emily was shorter with dark, curly hair and a friendly smile. They all had quality gear and seemed experienced. "Mind if we join you?" Emily asked, already shrugging off her backpack. I didn't mind the company. We chatted while they pulled out their own lunches. They told me they came to Yosemite every spring, that they'd been friends since college and made it a tradition. They asked about my photography, and David seemed genuinely interested in the camera I was using. "First time hiking alone?" Sarah asked between bites of her protein bar. "In Yosemite, yeah," I replied. "I've done solo trips in other parks, though." "Well, you picked a good trail," David said. "But if you want to see something really spectacular, we could show you. It's just a bit off the main path." I hesitated. "How far off?" "Not far," Emily chimed in. "Maybe a 20-minute detour. It's this amazing viewpoint that's not on the tourist maps. We discovered it a couple years ago. The light would be perfect right now for photos," David added, glancing at my camera. I remember thinking about it for maybe 30 seconds. They seemed nice enough, knowledgeable about the area, and I was already feeling comfortable with them. Plus, the idea of capturing something unique, away from the standard Yosemite shots, was appealing. "Sure," I finally said. "That sounds great." We packed up our things and continued along the main trail for another 15 minutes before David pointed to a narrow path branching off to the right. It wasn't marked, but looked like it had been used before. "This way," he said, leading the charge. The path was steeper than the main trail, but still manageable. Sarah walked beside me, asking about my job in the city and sharing stories about her work as a physical therapist. Her friendliness made the increasingly difficult terrain seem less concerning. After about 20 minutes, already longer than they'd initially suggested, the path became less defined. I started noticing that we were having to push through more underbrush, and the trees were getting denser. "Are you sure this is the right way?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "Absolutely," David called back over his shoulder. "It gets a little rough here, but it opens up soon. Trust me, it's worth it." Another 10 minutes passed, and the trail had basically disappeared. We were just moving through forest now, with David seemingly navigating by memory or intuition. I checked my phone. No signal, of course. I also noticed we'd been walking for about 40 minutes since leaving the main trail. "How much further?" I asked, a hint of concern creeping into my voice. "Not far now," Emily said from behind me. "You're going to love it." I started feeling uneasy. The casual conversation had died down, and I noticed David checking his watch more frequently. Sarah, who had been so chatty before, now walked silently, her eyes scanning our surroundings. The friendly atmosphere had shifted almost imperceptibly. Finally, after what must have been an hour off the main trail, we emerged into a clearing near the edge of a cliff. The view was undeniably stunning, a panorama of the valley that you definitely couldn't see from the marked trails. But my appreciation was dulled by growing anxiety. We were far from any established path, and the three of them had positioned themselves in a way that felt strategic. David stood near the only obvious exit from the clearing, while Sarah and Emily flanked me on either side. "Beautiful, right?" David said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, it's amazing," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady as I took a few photos. "But I should probably start heading back to the main trail soon. I wanted to make it to Glacier Point before heading back to my car." The three of them exchanged glances. "Actually," David said, "we know a shortcut back from here. It's a bit steep, but it'll save you at least an hour." Every alarm bell in my body was ringing now. Their body language had completely changed. The friendly hikers were gone, replaced by people who seemed to be calculating something. "Thanks, but I think I'd prefer to go back the way we came," I said, trying to sound casual while looking for an opening to move past David. His face hardened just slightly. "That would be a waste of time. This way is much faster." Sarah put a hand on my shoulder. "Yeah, come on. We've done this route dozens of times." I felt trapped. We were miles from the main trail, in an area where no one would hear if I called for help. I nodded slowly, buying time while I tried to figure out what to do. David seemed pleased and turned to lead the way again, pointing toward a rough descent that looked dangerously steep and unstable. It was clearly not a trail anyone used regularly, if ever. "It looks pretty rough," I said, hanging back. "Are you sure it's safe?" David's response came too quickly, his tone sharp. "Of course it's safe. We've done it before. Don't you trust us?" That was it. The moment I knew for certain something was very wrong. The flash of anger in his voice, the way Emily and Sarah tensed up, the complete isolation of our position. I forced a smile. "Sorry, just being cautious. Let me check my boot first." I think I felt a pebble. I crouched down to fiddle with my laces, watching as they moved a few steps ahead, with David already starting down the steep incline. They were talking in hushed voices, their backs to me. I quietly took my phone out, still no signal, and put it back in my pocket. Then I ran. I bolted back the way we had come, pushing through the brush as fast as I could. I heard shouts behind me, David's voice cutting through the forest with a fury that confirmed all my fears. "Hey, stop! Get back here!" Their footsteps thundered behind me, but I had a head start, and adrenaline was fueling every step. Branches whipped at my face and arms. I tripped over roots but kept scrambling up, running blindly through the forest. I had no idea if I was heading in the right direction, but I knew I needed to put as much distance between us as possible. I ran for what felt like forever, my lungs burning, sweat soaking through my clothes despite the cool air. Eventually, I couldn't hear them anymore, but I didn't slow down. I kept pushing forward, changing directions occasionally, hoping to throw them off if they were still following. After what must have been at least 30 minutes of panicked running, I stumbled onto something that made me want to cry with relief. A marked trail, not even the one we had originally been on, but a different established path. I checked my map with shaking hands and realized I had somehow connected with a parallel trail that would eventually lead back to the main visitor areas. I kept moving at a fast pace, constantly looking over my shoulder. Every snapping twig made me jump. Every distant voice sent a spike of fear through me. Finally, I spotted a group of hikers ahead, an older couple and what looked like their adult son. I must have looked like hell when I approached them, scratched up, wild-eyed, still breathing hard. "Are you okay?" the woman asked, genuine concern in her voice. I wasn't sure how much to say. "I got separated from my group and took a wrong turn. Do you know how far to the ranger station?" They pointed me in the right direction and offered water, which I gratefully accepted. I considered telling them the whole story, but worried about sounding crazy or overreactive. Maybe I had misread the situation, but deep down, I knew I hadn't. When I finally reached the ranger station, I reported what had happened. The rangers took my statement seriously and got detailed descriptions of David, Sarah, and Emily. They radioed to other stations and sent a team to check the area I had described, but I knew it was a long shot. The park is huge, and by then, hours had passed. I stayed at the station until evening, jumping at every sound, expecting to see the three of them walk in at any moment. The rangers offered to escort me back to my car, which I accepted. One of them followed me in his vehicle until I reached the park exit, just to be safe. I drove straight home that night, 4 hours in the dark, checking my rearview mirror obsessively. I called my sister from the road and asked her to meet me at my apartment. It's been weeks now, and the rangers never found them. I sent the photos I'd taken that morning to the investigation team, but none of them showed the 3 hikers. They'd approached after I'd put my camera away. I've replayed that day in my mind countless times, analyzing every word, every look, wondering if I overreacted. But I know I didn't. Whatever they had planned for me in that isolated spot, it wasn't good. I think about what might have happened if I hadn't seized that moment to run, and it makes me feel physically sick. I haven't been hiking since. I'm not sure when or if I'll ever feel comfortable on a trail again. The isolation that once appealed to me now seems dangerous. The forests that once felt peaceful now feel full of hiding places. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced I hear David's angry voice calling after me. I check the locks on my doors and windows obsessively. I've started seeing a therapist to deal with the anxiety. What haunts me most is not knowing who they really were, not knowing what they wanted from me, not knowing if they're still out there taking other hikers down unmarked paths. And sometimes in my darkest moments, I wonder if anyone would have ever found me if I hadn't run when I did. I've been putting off writing about this for almost a year now. Even thinking about what happened that day makes my stomach turn, but people keep telling me I should share it somewhere. Maybe it'll help someone else stay alert or whatever. I don't know. I just know I can't shake what happened last summer. I've been a lifeguard at Sunshine Beach in Florida for about 4 years now. It's usually a pretty standard job, watching for swimmers in trouble, treating the occasional jellyfish sting, telling kids not to run on the wet concrete around the facilities. You know, normal beach stuff. Most days blend together in a haze of sunscreen, whistles, and rotation schedules. July 16th last year started like any other summer day. The beach was packed by 10 a.m., temperature already pushing 90 degrees. My shift started at 8, and I'd been watching from Tower 3, which gives a good view of the central swimming area and about 200 yards of shoreline in either direction. Nothing unusual. Families setting up umbrellas, teenagers showing off in the water, the usual beach crowd. Around 11:30, I noticed them for the first time. 4 guys sitting under a small blue canopy tent about 50 yards to my right. At first, nothing seemed off. Just 4 dudes hanging out at the beach, right? But after a while, something about them kept drawing my attention back. They weren't doing normal beach stuff. They weren't swimming. They weren't reading. They weren't even drinking beers or whatever. They were just watching. I've developed a sense for different types of beachgoers over the years. These guys didn't fit any normal pattern. They were all probably late 30s to early 40s, dressed in what I'd call deliberate casual, like they'd thought too hard about looking like regular beach guys. One had a baseball cap pulled low, another wore sunglasses that he never took off. 2 had t-shirts on despite the heat. What really bothered me was how they were positioned. They weren't clustered together like friends would be. They were spread out under and around their canopy in a way that gave them different viewing angles of the beach. And they kept whispering to each other, then looking around separately. I kept an eye on them while doing my regular scans. By noon, I noticed one of them had moved about 30 yards away, sitting on a towel closer to where a bunch of elementary-aged kids were building sand castles. The kids were maybe 8-10 years old, and their parents were nearby but distracted, scrolling on phones or talking in groups. The guy just sat there watching these kids. Not in a normal way either. He wasn't smiling at their antics or casually observing. He was studying them, like he was memorizing their faces or something. I radioed to Miguel, my supervisor, just mentioning I was keeping an eye on some suspicious guys. He said he'd swing by on his next patrol, but was dealing with a lost child at the north end. By 12:30, another one of the men had positioned himself closer to the snack bar, which is where a lot of parents let their kids go buy ice cream or sodas on their own. He was pretending to read something on his phone, but I could see he was watching the children coming and going. That's when I first felt real dread creeping up my spine. These guys were coordinating somehow. They had spread out to cover different areas where kids congregated. The third guy, still at their canopy, had what looked like a professional camera now and was taking pictures toward the water. But I noticed his lens wasn't aimed at the horizon or surfers. It was pointed at the shallow area where younger kids were splashing around. At 1 p.m., I had my scheduled break, but I didn't take it. I told the incoming guard, Amber, that I was going to patrol the beach for a bit first. I wanted to get closer to these guys, see if I could hear anything or get a better look. I grabbed my rescue buoy as a prop and walked a patrol line that would take me past their canopy. As I got closer, the guy with the camera quickly lowered it and turned away. The one still at the tent was on his phone, but he looked up as I approached. Our eyes met for just a second, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. It wasn't embarrassment or the usual, "oh, a lifeguard is nearby" reaction. It was calculation. He was sizing me up, figuring out if I was a threat to whatever they were planning. He immediately looked away and said something to his friend in a low voice. I couldn't hear what they said, but their body language changed instantly. They became more casual, more animated, like they were just buddies hanging out. It was so rehearsed it made my skin crawl. I kept walking, heart pounding in my chest. As soon as I was past them, I glanced back and saw the guy who'd been sitting by the sandcastle kids was now walking slowly toward a little girl, maybe 5 or 6, who had wandered a bit away from her family while chasing seagulls. He had something in his hand, looked like candy or a small toy. I immediately changed direction and headed straight for them. The guy saw me coming and veered off, pretending to be heading to the water instead. The little girl ran back to her mom, completely unaware. That was it for me. I went straight back to my tower and called beach security on the radio. I told them we had 4 suspicious men who appeared to be stalking children and needed immediate assistance. The dispatcher said they'd send someone, but it might be 15-20 minutes since they were handling an incident in the parking lot. I used my binoculars to keep track of all 4 men. The one by the snack bar was now talking to a boy who looked around 7. The boy's parents weren't visible nearby. My heart rate skyrocketed. The guy placed his hand on the kid's shoulder in a way that looked friendly to anyone casually glancing over. But I could see the boy trying to step back. The 4th man, who I hadn't been able to track as closely, was now positioned near the beach exit that led to the south parking lot. It hit me all at once. They were boxing in sections of the beach, creating areas where they could intercept kids. The realization of what might be happening made me feel physically sick. I couldn't wait for security. I grabbed the microphone connected to the beach speakers and made an announcement. "Attention beachgoers, this is Lifeguard Jackson from Tower 3. All parents, please check on your children and keep them within arm's reach at this time. We have a beach safety situation developing. I repeat, all parents, please gather your children immediately." People looked confused, but I could see parents starting to call their kids back from the water and play areas. The man by the snack bar immediately backed away from the boy he'd been talking to. The boy ran to a woman who was now looking around frantically. Must have been his mom. The guy with the camera started packing up their canopy with quick, efficient movements. The one who'd been near the sandcastle kids was already walking rapidly toward the exit where the 4th man waited. Beach security finally arrived, just one officer at first. I pointed out the men to him, and he approached the one still packing up the canopy. As soon as the security guard got close, the man abandoned the half-collapsed tent and started jogging toward the exit. I blew 3 sharp blasts on my whistle, our signal for an emergency, and jumped down from my tower. I shouted as loud as I could, "Security alert! Watch your children! Those men in the blue shirts are trying to take children!" It was like dropping a bomb on the beach. There was instant chaos. Parents grabbed their kids. Other men from the beach started moving toward the guys I'd pointed out. 2 of them took off running toward the parking lot, while the one security guard managed to grab hold of the guy who'd been by the snack bar. More security arrived within minutes, and the police weren't far behind. They caught 2 of the 4 men in the parking lot trying to get into a white van with out-of-state plates. The 4th one got away. What the police found in that van will haunt me forever. Zip ties, duct tape, sedatives, fake IDs, and pictures. So many pictures of children from our beach and others nearby, clearly taken over several days of surveillance. The police detective later told me they were part of a trafficking ring that had been operating along the East Coast. They'd already taken 3 children from beaches in North Carolina and Georgia. They would spend days watching a beach, identifying kids who were allowed to wander a bit, and learning the patterns of the lifeguards and security. If I hadn't noticed them, if I'd taken my break when scheduled, if I'd waited for security to handle it quietly. I don't want to think about what might have happened. The detective said they usually targeted multiple children at once, creating confusion so they could disappear with at least one in the chaos. I got some local news coverage, a commendation from the beach patrol, all that stuff. People called me a hero, but honestly, I just feel sick about the whole thing. I keep thinking about all the times I might have missed something similar before. All the beaches where no one noticed in time. I'm still lifeguarding, but everything's different now. I watch people differently. I'm constantly scanning for adults who seem too interested in children that aren't theirs. I notice when someone sits too long without enjoying the beach. I track people who move from place to place without purpose. Last week, I thought I saw the 4th guy, the one who got away. Just a glimpse of someone watching from the boardwalk. By the time I got another guard to cover my tower and ran over there, he was gone. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was my paranoia. But I know they're still out there. People like that are always out there. So that's my story. I don't know why I'm finally writing it down now. Maybe as a warning to other lifeguards or parents. Maybe because I'm tired of it replaying in my head every night when I try to sleep. All I know is I can't forget their eyes when they realized I was onto them, cold, calculating, angry that I'd interfered with their plans. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been working that tower that day. If someone else had been there instead, someone who might not have noticed the pattern or trusted their gut. I try not to think about it too much. I keep a closer eye on the beach now. We all do. I still check my rearview mirror more than I need to. Been doing it for about 7 months now. My therapist says it's a normal response to trauma, but she doesn't really get it. How could she? I barely understand what happened myself. This all started last October when I decided to take a solo road trip through the Midwest. I had just finished a brutal project at work and needed to clear my head. No real destination in mind, just me, my 2014 Honda Civic, some playlists, and the open road. The first 3 days were exactly what I needed. I stopped at roadside attractions, ate at local diners, and slept in cheap motels. It was perfect. On the 4th day, I was driving through rural Illinois on some back roads. I like to avoid the interstates when I can. You see more of the real America that way. It was around 4 p.m. when my car started making this awful grinding noise. Then the temperature gauge shot up, and steam started coming from under the hood. I pulled over immediately, but I already knew it was bad. I popped the hood and was hit with a face full of steam. Once it cleared, I could see coolant leaking everywhere. Definitely not something I could fix myself. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but of course, no signal, not even 1 bar. Typical. According to my GPS, like a lifeline until dawn broke. When I went downstairs the next morning, Joe wasn't there. Instead, a younger man I'd never seen before was working in the garage. He looked up when he heard me. "You must be Riley," he said. Joe had to go pick up some parts. He'll be back later today. Something about this guy set off alarm bells in my head. His smile was too wide, his eyes too intense. When exactly will he be back? I asked. I really need to get out of here today. The man's smile didn't waver. Hard to say. Roads around here can be tricky. Why don't you get some breakfast? Mabel's expecting you. I nodded and left, but I had no intention of going to the diner. Instead, I went back upstairs, grabbed my backpack, and stuffed it with everything I'd brought. I was getting out of this town, car or no car. I waited until the man in the garage was busy under a car, then slipped out the side door. Instead of heading toward the center of town, I walked in the opposite direction, toward where we'd driven in with the tow truck. I'd gone about 3 blocks when I noticed the silence. No birds, no distant traffic, not even wind. Just perfect, absolute silence. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see 3 people walking about half a block back. A woman in a floral dress, an older man in overalls, and a younger man who looked like he could be the older man's son. They weren't talking or looking at each other. They were all staring directly at me. I picked up my pace. So did they. I started jogging. They started jogging. I ran. They ran. More people joined them from side streets and houses. 6, then 10, then maybe 15 people, all running after me with that same blank expression. The town seemed to stretch on forever. Wasn't it just one main street? How was I still in Millerville? My lungs were burning, and the footsteps behind me were getting closer. Finally, I saw the Leaving Millerville sign ahead. Just as I reached it, I heard a car approaching. I ran into the middle of the road, waving my arms frantically. It was an old station wagon driven by an elderly couple. They screeched to a halt, and I yanked open the back door and jumped in. "Drive! Please drive!" I screamed. The old man hit the gas, and we sped away. I looked back to see the crowd of townspeople standing at the town limits, watching us drive away. They didn't cross the line. They just stood there, staring. The couple took me to the next town, where I told my story to skeptical police officers. They agreed to send someone to check out Millerville and called a tow truck to retrieve my car. The next day, the officers returned with disturbing news. They'd found Joe's auto repair, but it was abandoned. Looked like it had been closed for years. The entire town seemed deserted. No Mabel's diner. No people watching from windows. Just empty, decaying buildings. When I insisted people had been there just yesterday, they exchanged that look people give when they think you're crazy. My car was towed to a garage in the larger town and repaired within a day. I continued my trip, cutting it short to head home, constantly checking my mirrors to see if I was being followed. Sometimes, usually when I'm falling asleep, I think I hear whispers. My name, so soft I can barely hear it. Riley. I've tried researching Millerville. According to official records, the town was largely abandoned in the 1980s after the factory that employed most residents closed down. Current population, 12. I know what I experienced. I know what I saw. I just don't know what would have happened if I'd stayed another night. If I'd let them in when they whispered through my door. If I hadn't escaped when I did. And I don't think I want to know. I've never shared this with anyone outside our group, but I need to get this off my chest. Maybe writing it down will help me process what happened. I still wake up in cold sweats some nights, my heart racing, thinking I'm back there. It happened last summer when 5 of us decided to go camping in the Ozarks. Me, Mike, Sarah, Jake, and Lisa had been planning this trip for months. We all needed a break from our jobs, from the endless notifications, and from city life in general. Mike found this spot that wasn't on any official campgrounds. Pristine wilderness, he called it. That should have been our first warning. The drive there took about 4 hours from Kansas City. We were all excited, playing music, sharing snacks, talking about how great it would be to disconnect for a few days. When we finally reached the trailhead, we had to hike about 2 miles to reach our camping spot. It was beautiful, a small clearing near a creek with enough flat ground for our tents, surrounded by thick forest that seemed to stretch forever in every direction. We set up camp quickly, 3 tents, a fire pit, and we hung our food in a tree to keep it away from animals. The weather was perfect, and honestly, those first few hours were amazing. We hiked to a nearby swimming hole, jumped off some rocks into the water, drank some beers, and cooked hot dogs and s'mores over the fire. We were laughing, telling stories, and enjoying being away from everything. Jake kept saying how there was 0 cell reception, which was exactly what we wanted. By nightfall, we were exhausted in that good way that comes from a day outdoors. Mike and Jake shared 1 tent, Lisa and Sarah another, and I had my small 1-person tent. I remember falling asleep almost instantly, feeling satisfied and peaceful. I don't know what woke me up. Maybe it was a sound, or just that weird 6th sense you sometimes get. My watch said it was 2:17 a.m. I needed to pee, so I quietly unzipped my tent, trying not to make too much noise. The night was eerily quiet. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just dead silence. The moon was bright enough that I could see pretty well without my flashlight. That's when I noticed something was wrong. Very wrong. I glanced over at the other tents and saw that Mike and Jake's tent was wide open. Same with the girls' tent. I figured maybe they'd gone to relieve themselves too, but something felt off. I walked closer and peered inside both tents. Empty. All 4 sleeping bags were there, but my friends weren't. My heart started to beat faster. I whispered their names, thinking maybe they were playing some stupid prank. Mike, Sarah. Guys, this isn't funny. No response. Then I heard a twig snap behind me. I spun around and nearly collapsed from shock. 6 men in dark clothing stood in a semicircle around our campsite. They weren't making any effort to hide. They just stood there, watching me. In the moonlight, I could see they all had guns, rifles or shotguns, I couldn't tell which. One of them stepped forward. He was tall with a beard and wore a dark cap pulled low over his eyes. "Don't make a sound," he said in a low voice. "You're gonna come with us, nice and quiet." My mouth went completely dry. I couldn't have screamed even if I wanted to. My legs felt like they would give out. I thought about running, but where would I go? We were miles from anywhere, and these guys clearly knew these woods better than I did. "Where are my friends?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "They're fine," the man said, "and they'll stay fine as long as you cooperate. Now move." 2 of the men flanked me as we started walking into the forest, away from our campsite. The others followed behind. They didn't bind my hands or blindfold me, which somehow made it even more terrifying, like they weren't worried about me identifying them or finding my way back. We walked for what felt like forever, but was probably about 20 minutes. No one spoke. I kept trying to memorize landmarks, but in the dark everything looked the same, just endless trees and undergrowth. Eventually, we reached a small clearing where an old rusted van was parked on what looked like an overgrown logging road. The bearded man opened the back doors of the van and my stomach dropped. Inside were my 4 friends, all bound with zip ties and duct tape over their mouths. Their eyes widened when they saw me, and Sarah was crying silently. They didn't appear hurt, just terrified. "Get in," the man ordered. Before I could move, one of the other men grabbed my wrists and zip-tied them together. Another slapped a piece of duct tape across my mouth. They roughly shoved me into the van with the others and slammed the doors shut. The drive was bumpy and disorienting. With no windows in the back, we had no idea where we were going. We tried to communicate with our eyes, but what was there to say? We were all thinking the same thing. Are they going to kill us? After what felt like 30 minutes, the van stopped. The doors opened, and we were yanked out one by one. We stood in front of a run-down cabin in the middle of nowhere. It was small, maybe 2 rooms, with boarded-up windows and a sagging porch. One of the men prodded us forward with his gun, and we shuffled inside. The interior was sparse, just a few old chairs, a table, and what looked like camping supplies stacked in one corner. They forced us to sit on the floor against one wall. The bearded man, who seemed to be the leader, finally spoke again. "Listen up. You're going to stay here and be quiet. Don't try anything stupid. We'll be back." He didn't explain why we were there or what they wanted from us. They left one man to guard us, a younger guy who kept fidgeting with his gun. He wouldn't look at us directly. The others went outside and we could hear them talking in low voices, though we couldn't make out what they were saying. Time became meaningless. There were no windows, no clocks, nothing to indicate whether it was day or night. My wrists were raw from the zip ties, and my mouth was painfully dry from the duct tape and lack of water. They didn't offer us food or water or even let us use a bathroom. At some point, they removed the duct tape from our mouths, probably so we wouldn't suffocate, but they warned us not to speak. I have no idea how long we were in that cabin. It felt like days, but it might have been less. Our guard would change occasionally, but none of them would speak to us. Sometimes I could hear them arguing outside, their voices rising and falling, but about what, I couldn't tell. The worst part was not knowing why. Were they going to demand ransom? Use us for some kind of trafficking? Was this some twisted hunting game? The uncertainty was almost worse than any physical discomfort. On what might have been the second day, something changed. The arguments outside got louder. I could hear the bearded man shouting at someone, words like, "wasn't the plan," and "too risky now," filtered through the thin walls. Then the sound of a vehicle starting up and driving away. The cabin door opened, and the bearded man came in looking agitated. He spoke briefly to our guard. Then both of them went outside, leaving the door slightly ajar. It was the first time we'd been left completely alone. Mike, who was sitting closest to the door, caught my eye. He nodded slightly toward the exit. My heart raced. Was this our chance? But what if it was a test? What if they were waiting just outside to see if we'd try to escape? We sat frozen for what felt like eternity. Then we heard more shouting from somewhere in the distance. Mike mouthed, "Now," and somehow managed to work his way to his feet, despite his bound hands. He shuffled to the door and peered out, then turned back to us and nodded. Using his teeth and some kind of nail or screw he'd found on the floor, Mike had been working on his zip ties. Somehow he'd managed to weaken them enough that with one powerful flex they snapped. Quickly, he helped free the rest of us. We stood in that cabin, rubbing our wrists, terrified but suddenly energized by the possibility of escape. The shouting outside was getting more heated, something about money and someone not showing up. "We have to go now," Mike whispered. "Stay together and head straight into the woods. Don't stop for anything." We slipped out the door onto the porch. There was no sign of our captors, but we could hear them around the side of the cabin. It was late afternoon or early evening from the looks of the light. Without hesitation, we bolted toward the tree line about 50 yards away. We were halfway there when the shouting behind us changed tone. "Hey, stop!" We ran harder than I've ever run in my life. The forest was thick, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. Behind us, I could hear the men crashing through the underbrush and shouting to each other, "Spread out! Don't lose them! Head them off at the creek!" My lungs were burning and my legs felt like they would give out at any moment, but terror kept me moving. We had no plan, no direction, just blind panic driving us forward. At some point we came to a small creek. Jake, who had done some outdoors training, whispered, "Follow it downstream. It might lead to civilization, and it'll be harder for them to track us." We splashed through the shallow water, trying to move quickly but quietly. The sounds of pursuit seemed to fade, then grow louder, then fade again. They were searching, but they didn't know exactly where we were. As dusk settled in, the forest became increasingly difficult to navigate. We were exhausted, dehydrated, and disoriented, but we kept moving, afraid to stop even for a minute. Just when I thought we couldn't go any further, the trees thinned out, and we saw the glow of a campfire through the branches. For a terrifying moment, I thought it might be our captors, but as we crept closer, we saw it was a family, a couple with 2 young kids roasting marshmallows. We must have looked like hell, dirty, scratched up, wild-eyed with fear. The father jumped to his feet when we stumbled into their campsite, putting himself between us and his family. "Please," Sarah sobbed, "help us. We were kidnapped." I don't remember much of what happened next. The family had a satellite phone. They called the authorities. They gave us water and wrapped us in blankets while we waited. I remember sitting there shaking uncontrollably, jumping at every sound from the forest, certain our captors would find us at any moment. Park rangers arrived first, then state police, then what seemed like dozens of officers. We were taken to a hospital, treated for dehydration and minor injuries. We gave statements, descriptions, everything we could remember. The police launched a massive search. They found our original campsite, our equipment still there. But they never found the cabin, never found the men, never found any evidence of what had happened to us beyond our own testimonies and physical condition. Some officers implied that we might have gotten lost, panicked, and imagined or exaggerated what happened. Others suggested it might have been drug traffickers who mistook us for rivals or threats. There were theories about backwoods militia groups, about human trafficking operations, but no answers, no closure. It's been almost a year now. I still have nightmares. I still can't go camping or even hiking. Loud noises make me jump. I've moved to a new apartment with better security. I check the locks 3 times before going to bed. Mike and I are the only ones who still talk about it regularly. Sarah moved to another state. Jake started drinking heavily. Lisa pretends it never happened. Sometimes I wonder if we imagined the whole thing. But then I look at the small scars on my wrists from the zip ties, and I know it was real. Those men are still out there. That cabin is still hidden somewhere in the Ozarks. And I'll never understand why they took us or why they let us escape. All I know is that wilderness isn't empty. Sometimes the most dangerous things in the forest walk on 2 legs, and I'll never set foot in those mountains again. I still don't know how to start this. It's been 3 months, and I'm still not sleeping right. My therapist suggested writing it all down might help process what happened, so here goes. Back in July, I booked a cabin in the Adirondacks for a week-long getaway. I'd been working nonstop for months and desperately needed some alone time. No co-workers, no roommate, no constant notifications. Just me, some books, and nature. The listing looked perfect. Secluded but not completely isolated, reasonable price, good reviews. The owner, Tom, seemed like a nice older guy when we messaged. He mentioned he lived nearby and took pride in maintaining the property himself. When I arrived that Monday, Tom was waiting on the porch. He must have been in his 60s, friendly enough, with this permanent smile that reached his eyes. He gave me a quick tour, showed me how the old gas stove worked, where the circuit breaker was, basic stuff. He mentioned he was just down the road if you need anything at all, handed me the keys, and left. I remember feeling relieved at how straightforward it all was. The first 2 days were exactly what I needed. I hiked during the mornings, finding these incredible lookout points over the mountains. The afternoons I spent swimming in the small lake behind the property. Evenings were for reading on the porch with a glass of wine. No internet, spotty cell service. It was perfect. I felt myself unwinding for the first time in forever. On the third day it rained. I decided to have a lazy day inside, make some comfort food, and catch up on reading. The cabin was cozy, all wood interior, slightly dated furniture but clean, with bookshelves stuffed with paperbacks left by previous guests. Around midday I started tidying up a bit. Not because I had to, but it just felt like something to do. I was dusting the bookshelf, moving books around to get behind them, when something caught my eye. There was this small, dark circle in the back corner of the middle shelf, partially hidden by the books. At first, I thought it was just a knothole in the wood or something. But when I looked closer, I realized it was perfectly round, about the size of a pencil eraser. I leaned in and suddenly recognized what it was, a camera lens. My stomach dropped. I stared at it, trying to convince myself I was wrong. But I wasn't. It was definitely a camera, built into the bookshelf, pointed directly at the couch where I'd been lounging in my pajamas, reading, napping. I stepped back, suddenly aware of my body, my movements. I went from feeling completely at ease to completely exposed in an instant. I looked around the room with new eyes. What else wasn't what it seemed? I didn't want to believe it, but once I started looking, I found more. There was one hidden in a picture frame on the wall facing the dining table. Another one built into the smoke detector in the hallway. The bathroom vent had one pointed at the shower. The kitchen clock had one aimed at the stove area. I felt sick, physically sick. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone to check if there was enough signal to call someone. There wasn't. The rain was coming down hard now, drumming on the roof. I was alone in the middle of nowhere, and someone had been watching me the entire time. Every shower, every private moment, every time I changed clothes. I tried to think clearly. I needed to get out, but I didn't have a car. I'd used a rideshare service from the bus station. The nearest town was about 8 miles away, and it was pouring rain. I decided I'd pack up and leave first thing in the morning when the weather cleared. In the meantime, I put small pieces of tissue over each camera I found, trying not to make it obvious that I'd discovered them. I kept thinking about how Tom had shown me around, pointing out features of the cabin while knowing these cameras were hidden everywhere. I barely slept that night. I kept the bathroom light on and stayed fully clothed, jumping at every sound. The rain finally stopped around 6 a.m., and I started quietly packing my stuff. I was almost done when I heard a car pull up outside. Then there was a knock at the door. I froze. Through the window I could see it was Tom. He was holding a paper bag, smiling that same smile. "Morning. Brought you some fresh eggs from my chickens," he called through the door. "Thought you might like them for breakfast?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat closed up, and my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. He knocked again, louder this time. "Hello? You up yet?" I moved away from the windows, trying not to make any noise. He knocked a third time, then called out, "I saw your light on earlier. Everything okay in there?" The way he said it, that he'd seen my light, made my skin crawl. How was he monitoring me? Were the cameras connected to his phone? His house? Did he stay up watching me all night? After what felt like forever, I heard him set something down on the porch. "I'll leave these here for you," he said, his voice different now, tighter. "Do you need a ride somewhere?" she asked. I must have looked terrible, muddy, wild-eyed, breathing hard. I hesitated, wondering if I could trust them, but what choice did I have? "I need to get to a police station," I said, my voice cracking. "Please." They let me in, and I sat in the back seat, giving them the shortest version of what happened that I could manage. The woman, Marie, kept looking back at me with this horrified expression. Her husband, Dave, just gripped the steering wheel tighter and drove faster. At the police station, a female officer named Ramirez took my statement. I told her everything, about finding the cameras, about Tom showing up, about escaping through the woods. She took it all very seriously, asking detailed questions about the locations of the cameras and what Tom had said to me. I showed her the cabin listing on my phone with Tom's full name and contact information. "You did the right thing," she told me when I finished. "We're going to send officers out there right away." They asked if I would go back with them to show them the cameras. The thought made me feel sick, but I agreed. Officer Ramirez stayed with me the whole time, while 2 male officers accompanied us in a separate car. When we pulled up to the cabin, Tom's truck wasn't there. My suitcase was still inside, untouched. I walked the officers through the cabin, pointing out each camera I had found. The tissues I'd placed over them were still there. One of the officers, a tech specialist, confirmed they were all real, functioning cameras, not just lenses, but actual recording devices. "These are sophisticated," he said, examining the one in the bookshelf. "They're hardwired to transmit a signal, not just record locally." They photographed everything, collected evidence, and one officer stayed at the cabin while Ramirez drove me back to the station. By the time we got there, they had already gotten a warrant to search Tom's house based on the evidence from the cabin. I waited at the station, drinking terrible coffee and trying to stop shaking. A few hours later, Ramirez came back with an update. They'd arrested Tom at his home, about a mile from the cabin. On his computer, they found folders upon folders of videos, not just of me, but of dozens of different guests going back years. He had been recording people and storing the footage all this time. The realization that I wasn't his only victim should have made me feel less alone, but somehow it made everything worse. All those people, all those private moments, all recorded and saved for him to watch whenever he wanted. And none of us had known. The officers found my suitcase and arranged for a hotel room in town for me that night. The next morning, they drove me to the bus station. Before I left, Ramirez gave me her card and told me they would need me to testify eventually. Tom was being charged with multiple counts of invasion of privacy, among other things. It's been 3 months now. I've given more statements, talked to prosecutors. I found out Tom had been renting that cabin for over 8 years. 8 years of watching people. The investigation revealed he had installed similar cameras in 2 other properties he owned in the area. I'm still struggling with feeling safe. I check for cameras everywhere I go now, hotel rooms, bathrooms, changing rooms. I put tape over my laptop camera and my phone camera when I'm not using them. I sleep with the lights on more often than not. The worst part is that something that should have been healing, time alone in nature, became this source of ongoing trauma. I can't stop wondering how many of those moments he watched. Did he see me crying during that phone call with my mom? Did he watch me sleeping? What did he do with those recordings of me? I'm writing this partly as a warning. Check your vacation rentals. Look for anything unusual. Trust your instincts if something feels off. But mostly I'm writing it because I need to get it out somehow. I need to acknowledge what happened to me so I can someday move past it. I keep telling myself that Tom is facing consequences, that he can't hurt anyone else now. That helps a little, but I still wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, feeling like I'm being watched. And the truth is, I don't know if that feeling will ever completely go away. I've been debating for months whether to share this experience. Part of me wants to forget it ever happened, but I can't shake the feeling that others should know what happened to me last summer in the Swiss Alps. I'm not usually paranoid, but this experience changed me. I'd been planning my solo backpacking trip through Switzerland for over a year. After a tough breakup and getting passed over for promotion at work, I needed to clear my head. I'm an experienced hiker. I've done portions of the Appalachian Trail and several multi-day trips in national parks, so I wasn't concerned about tackling the Alps alone. I'd researched the trails thoroughly, had all the right gear, and felt prepared. My third day on the trail started like any other. The weather was perfect, mid-60s, clear blue skies, and those incredible alpine views that make you feel tiny against the landscape. I'd been hiking since sunrise and stopped at a lookout point around noon to eat my lunch and take some photos. That's where I first met Lucas. He approached from the opposite direction, wearing high-end hiking clothes and carrying what looked like a brand-new Osprey backpack. Right away, I noticed he had this relaxed, confident way about him. His English was perfect, with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. "Beautiful spot, isn't it?" he said, setting down his pack. "Mind if I join you?" We got to talking while eating our lunches. He told me he was from Austria, but had been hiking the Alps for years. He knew so much about the area, pointing out peaks in the distance and naming them without hesitation. When I mentioned I was heading toward Lake Blaussee, he said he was going that direction too, and suggested we hike together. Looking back, I should have noticed the first red flag, how quickly he adjusted his plans to align with mine. But at the time, I was just happy to have company. Solo hiking can get lonely, and Lucas seemed knowledgeable and friendly. As we hiked that afternoon, he told me stories about his travels across Europe, his job in international business, and his family back in Austria. He asked normal questions about my life, and I shared basic details about my job in marketing and my passion for photography. The conversation flowed naturally, and I felt like I'd made a trail friend. By late afternoon, we reached a beautiful camping area near the lake. It was slightly off the main trail, in a spot I might not have found on my own. Lucas suggested it, saying it would have better views than the designated camping areas. "Trust me," he said. "I've camped here before. It's much better than crowding with other hikers." We set up our tents about 15 feet apart and gathered firewood. As the sun started to set, he pulled out a small camping stove and offered to make us both coffee. That's when I noticed his gear. Everything was top of the line, barely used. His sleeping bag looked fresh out of the box. When I commented on it, he laughed and said he'd just replaced all his equipment before this trip. We sat by the small fire as darkness fell, swapping travel stories. He'd supposedly been everywhere: Nepal, Patagonia, New Zealand. For each place I mentioned wanting to visit, he had detailed recommendations and personal anecdotes. In hindsight, they sounded rehearsed, like he was pulling them from travel blogs rather than experience. Around 10 p.m., the conversation took an uncomfortable turn. "So, did you tell many people about your route?" Lucas asked casually, poking at the fire with a stick. I shrugged. "My sister has my itinerary, and I posted some stuff on Instagram." But detailed plans? Like exactly where you'd be each day? He was staring into the fire, not looking at me. Not really. I mean, I'm kind of winging it. Why? Just curious. I always tell someone exactly where I'll be. Safety, you know. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. When are you expected back? That question made me uneasy. It's something hikers discuss, but his tone felt off. Sunday, I lied. My actual return flight wasn't until Wednesday. He nodded slowly. That's smart. Not staying too long. The weather can change quickly here. I made an excuse about being tired and retreated to my tent earlier than I normally would. Before zipping up, I noticed Lucas checking something on his phone, which struck me as odd since he'd mentioned earlier that there wasn't reception in this area. I didn't sleep well that night. Every sound jolted me awake. The wind against my tent, animals rustling in the underbrush, and once, what sounded like footsteps too close to my tent. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I kept my pocket knife close. Morning brought fog and a completely different Lucas. The friendly, talkative guy from yesterday was gone, replaced by someone tense and distracted. He barely spoke as we made breakfast, constantly checking his watch and scanning the trail. When I asked if everything was okay, he snapped that he was fine, just thinking about the day ahead. I think we should split up today, he said abruptly as I was packing my tent. I want to take a more challenging route. Relief flooded through me. Sure, no problem. Which way are you heading? His intensity when asking this made my skin crawl. I deliberately gave him vague information. I'll probably follow the main trail toward the next village. Take it easy today. He nodded, his eyes examining my face like he was trying to determine if I was lying. I'll probably see you there tonight then. As I finished packing, I realized I couldn't find my wallet. I always kept it in a specific pocket of my backpack, but it wasn't there. I emptied my entire pack, growing increasingly panicked. My credit cards, ID, and about 300 Swiss francs were missing. Lucas watched me search with an expression I can only describe as calculating. Problem? He asked. My wallet's gone. I looked directly at him. Did you happen to see it? No. His response was immediate and flat. Maybe you dropped it on the trail yesterday. I was certain I hadn't. I'd used it to buy snacks at the last village before meeting him, and then returned it to that same pocket. I always double-checked. I'm sure it's somewhere, he said dismissively, hoisting his pack. Good luck finding it. I should get going. He left before I could say anything else. Something felt very wrong, but I had no proof he'd taken anything. I repacked my bag, deciding to hike back toward the last town rather than continuing forward. If Lucas had taken my wallet, I didn't want to risk running into him again. If he hadn't, I needed to retrace my steps anyway. I hiked for about 3 hours, constantly looking over my shoulder. Every snapping twig made me jump. I was about 2 miles from the nearest village when I heard footsteps on the trail behind me moving fast. I stepped aside, thinking it was another hiker, but when I turned, Lucas was there, breathing hard and looking desperate. His appearance had changed. His expensive jacket was gone, replaced by a simple t-shirt, despite the cool mountain air. His hair was wet, like he'd dunked his head in a stream. "Jordan, wait," he called, stopping about 10 feet from me. "I need to talk to you." Every alarm in my body was screaming. I gripped my trekking poles tighter. "What do you want?" He ran his hand through his damp hair. "I need your help. I'm in trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind where people are looking for me." His eyes darted around nervously. I need to change identities for a while." My blood ran cold. What are you talking about? Your passport. I need your passport and ID. He took a step closer. I can pay you. I have cash, a lot of it. I stepped back. No way. That's crazy. You don't understand. His voice changed, became harder. I'm not asking. I need your documents and your phone. That's when I noticed his right hand was in his pocket, gripping something. I don't know if he had a weapon, and I wasn't going to find out. My wallet's back at the campsite, I lied. I found it after you left. He studied my face, clearly not believing me. Then we'll go back together. Look, I don't want any trouble, I said, slowly shifting my weight, preparing to move. Then don't make any. He lunged forward suddenly, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. Give me your backpack. I reacted instinctively, swinging my trekking pole and connecting with his knee. He shouted in pain, loosening his grip enough that I could wrench free. I didn't think, I just ran, abandoning one of my poles in the process. I've never run so fast in my life. The trail was downhill, which helped, but my heavy pack bounced painfully against my back. I could hear him behind me, gaining ground. He was shouting something, but the blood pounding in my ears drowned out his words. The trail curved around a bend, and suddenly I could see rooftops in the distance. The village was closer than I'd thought. I pushed harder, my lungs burning. When I burst into the village, I headed straight for the first building I saw with people. A small inn with an outdoor seating area. Several hikers were having lunch outside. I must have looked terrified, because conversation stopped mid-sentence as I stumbled onto the patio. "Help!" I gasped to the older man who appeared to be the owner. "Someone's following me, trying to rob me." The owner didn't ask questions. He immediately ushered me inside and locked the glass door behind us. Through the window I saw Lucas appear at the edge of the village, spot me inside, and stop abruptly. Our eyes met for a moment, and the look in his, cold calculation replaced by fury, will haunt me forever. The owner was already on the phone with police. When Lucas saw this, he backed away and disappeared between buildings. The local police arrived quickly. They took my statement and searched the area but found no sign of him. I gave them a detailed description, and they seemed concerned when I mentioned the part about needing to change identities. One officer made several calls, speaking rapidly in German. Later, at the police station, they showed me some photos. They wouldn't confirm anything, but I got the impression Lucas matched the description of someone they were looking for. They asked if he'd mentioned specific places or names, if he'd touched any of my belongings. They took my remaining trekking pole for fingerprints, and exactly what questions he'd asked me. With the help of the Swiss police and the American consulate, I got emergency replacement documents and changed my flight to return home early. The police escorted me to the airport 3 days later. They never told me if they caught him. It's been 8 months, and I still have nightmares about that moment when Lucas's friendly mask slipped, revealing whatever was underneath. I don't know what he'd done, or who he really was. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't made it to that village. I still hike, but never alone. I'm jumpy around strangers on trails. I'm writing this partly as therapy, but also as a warning. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who seem the friendliest. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, approaching solo hikers with that same easy smile, waiting for the right opportunity. The thought keeps me awake at night. I never thought I'd be that person. You know, the one who gets separated from their friends at a music festival and has to deal with the aftermath. But that's exactly what happened to me last summer at Soundscape in California. and I haven't been able to shake the experience since. Me and my friends, Jess, Marco, Aiden, and Taylor, had been planning this trip for months. We'd coordinated our schedules, booked an Airbnb about 20 minutes from the festival grounds, and even made matching tie-dyed shirts with our initials on the back so we could spot each other easily in the crowds. The first day went perfectly. We stuck together like glue, danced our hearts out, and managed to see all the acts on our must-watch list. We even had this system where we'd grab onto each other's backpacks in heavily congested areas to avoid getting separated. Like I said, we had it all figured out. Day 2 started just as great. The weather was perfect, sunny but not too hot, with a light breeze that kept us from getting completely drenched in sweat. We'd eaten breakfast together at the Airbnb, reviewed the day's lineup, and agreed on meeting points in case anyone needed to use the restroom or grab food. All the logical precautions, right? Around 5 p.m. we were at the main stage for the headliner's set, the whole reason we'd bought tickets in the first place. The crowd was massive, easily the biggest gathering of the entire festival. People were shoulder to shoulder, jumping, dancing, singing along. The energy was incredible. I remember feeling so alive, like I was part of something bigger than myself. Then came the push. I don't know if someone fell or if there was a surge toward the front, but suddenly I felt myself being shoved sideways through the crowd. I reached out to grab Marco's backpack, but my fingers just brushed against the fabric before the sea of people pulled me further away. I called out their names, but my voice was drowned out by the deafening music and thousands of screaming fans. I tried not to panic at first. I told myself I'd just make my way to our designated meeting spot, a giant art installation shaped like a tree near the food stalls. I pushed against the flow of bodies, muttering "excuse me" and "sorry" as I bumped into strangers. It took me about 15 minutes to extract myself from the main crowd. Once I broke free, I immediately pulled out my phone to text the group. No signal. Of course, with thousands of people all trying to use their phones at once, the network was completely overloaded. I tried calling anyway, but the calls wouldn't go through. I headed toward our meeting spot, certain they'd realize I was missing and go there too. I waited for half an hour, constantly checking my phone for service and scanning the crowds for those tie-dyed shirts we'd made. Nothing. By now the sun was starting to set, and a different kind of anxiety was setting in. I'd been separated for over an hour, and the festival grounds were huge, over 300 acres with 5 different stages, countless food vendors, art installations, and a massive camping area. Finding 4 people in this chaos suddenly seemed impossible. I decided to be methodical. I visited each stage one by one, straining to see over the crowds, looking for any sign of my friends. I checked the restrooms, the water stations, even went back to the main stage where we'd been separated. By this point, I was starting to feel the physical effects of anxiety. My hands were shaking, my mouth was dry despite drinking tons of water, and I had this constant knot in my stomach. It was getting dark now, around 8 p.m., and the vibe of the festival was changing. More drunk people, more intense energy. I'd been searching for nearly 3 hours with no luck. The festival would go until midnight, but I was exhausted, hungry, and honestly getting scared. That's when he approached me. A guy, maybe early 30s, wearing a festival staff shirt, not security, more like a volunteer or something. He had dark hair pulled back in a small ponytail and was wearing those mirrored sunglasses, even though it was practically dark by now. "You look lost," he said, stopping a few feet away from me. "Need some help?" I hesitated. My mom's voice echoed in my head. "Don't talk to strangers, especially when you're alone." but he had that staff shirt on, and I was desperate. "I'm trying to find my friends," I explained, keeping my distance. "We got separated at the main stage hours ago, and I can't get a signal to call them." He nodded sympathetically. "That happens a lot here. What do they look like?" "I've been walking around all day. Might have seen them." I described my friends, mentioning our matching tie-dyed shirts, Marco's bright red baseball cap, Jess's pink hair. As I spoke, he took off his sunglasses, and something about finally seeing his eyes made me feel a little better about trusting him. "I think I might have seen the girl with pink hair heading toward the west entrance about an hour ago," he said. "She seemed to be looking for someone. Want me to walk you over there? It's getting crazy out here, and it's easier to move around if you look like you're with staff." I weighed my options. It was getting darker, I was alone, and the prospect of finding my friends suddenly seemed more likely. "Okay, thanks," I said, still maintaining some distance between us. "I really appreciate it." We started walking, him slightly ahead, leading the way through the crowds. He introduced himself as Mike and asked about the festival, which acts I'd seen, if this was my first time at Soundscape. Normal conversation stuff that made me relax a bit. "The cell service here is terrible," I complained, still checking my phone every few minutes. "Yeah, it's always bad, but it's usually better on the edges of the grounds," Mike said. "Come on, let's head this way. There's a spot where you might get a signal to call your friends." I don't know why, but something shifted in my perception of him then. Maybe it was the way he changed our direction, steering us away from the west entrance he'd mentioned earlier. Or maybe it was how he subtly positioned himself behind me now, his hand occasionally touching my shoulder to guide me. "Actually," I said, stopping abruptly, "I think I should just head to our meeting spot. They'll be looking for me there." "The signal's really better over here," he insisted, his tone different now, less casual, more directive. He gestured toward a less populated area where the festival grounds bordered some kind of wooded section. There were fewer lights there, fewer people. "I'll try my chances at the meeting spot," I repeated, taking a step back. That's when his whole demeanor changed. The helpful smile disappeared and he reached out, grabbing my wrist. Not aggressively, but firmly enough that I couldn't easily pull away. "Look," he said, his voice lower, "I'm trying to help you. You need to call your friends, right? Let's just go where it's quieter and you can use my phone if yours isn't working." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every instinct was screaming that something was wrong. I looked around, desperate to make eye contact with someone, anyone who might notice what was happening. But everyone was engrossed in the festival, their own conversations, their own worlds. "I need to use the restroom first," I said, trying to sound casual while tugging my arm back. "There's one right over there." His grip tightened. "I'll walk you. It's not safe for you to be alone." The way he said safe made my skin crawl. I could feel the sweat beading on my forehead, and it wasn't from the heat. This man had no intention of helping me find my friends. "Actually, I just saw someone I know," I lied, waving vaguely at a group of strangers. "I'm going to catch up with them." His eyes narrowed, and for a second I thought he wasn't going to let go. But then someone bumped into him from behind, breaking his concentration, and I seized the moment to wrench my wrist free. "Thanks for your help," I called out, already backing away, trying not to show the terror I felt. Once I had put a few people between us, I turned and started walking briskly, not running, because I didn't want to draw attention or make him give chase, but moving as quickly as possible through the crowd. I glanced back after about a minute and saw him pushing through people, following me. His face had completely transformed. Gone was any pretense of helpful concern. He looked determined, angry even. That's when I broke into a run. I didn't care anymore about looking weird or drawing attention. I just needed to get away from him. I zigzagged through the crowd, ducking between groups of festival goers, changing direction frequently. When I looked back again, I couldn't see him, but that didn't mean he wasn't still searching. I made my way to the camping area, where rows of tents provided some cover. I crouched behind a cluster of them, trying to catch my breath and think. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone, but I tried it again, and miracle of miracles, I had 1 bar of service. I texted our group chat immediately. Emergency, got separated. Man in staff shirt tried to lure me away. Near camping area section D, hiding behind blue tents. Please come. Then I waited, huddled behind those tents, jumping at every sound, convinced that at any moment Mike would appear. 10 minutes later, I got a response from Jess. OMG, stay there. Coming now. I've never been so relieved to see anyone as I was when my friends came sprinting into the camping area, calling my name. As soon as I saw them, the adrenaline that had been keeping me going seemed to evaporate, and I just burst into tears. We went straight to the security tent and reported what had happened. They took my description of the guy and promised to look for him, but in a crowd of thousands, with night having fully fallen, I knew the chances were slim. One of the security guards mentioned that they'd had reports of people impersonating staff earlier in the day, which only made me feel worse. This guy probably wasn't even associated with the festival. For the rest of Soundscape, we implemented a buddy system. Literally no one was allowed to go anywhere alone, not even to the bathroom. I kept seeing him everywhere. Every dark-haired man made me freeze in panic, but we never encountered him again. It's been almost a year now, and I still haven't been to another festival or concert. I can't handle being in large crowds anymore. Every time I think about going, I remember how quickly things went from perfect to terrifying, how easily I was separated from my friends, and how differently things could have ended if I hadn't gotten away when I did. The worst part is not knowing what his intentions were. What would have happened if I'd followed him to that secluded area? Would I even be here to write this? The thought keeps me up at night sometimes. So if you're heading to a festival this summer, please be careful. Make plans with your friends, establish meeting points, and trust your gut if something feels off. And maybe avoid the helpful strangers in staff shirts who want to lead you away from the crowds. They might not be trying to help you at all.